Hello. This is what if Ace, Luffy and Sabo were on the same crew. Please like and subscribe to my channel. If this video gets 3 or more likes I will make part 2. Please enjoy the video. Yes, he's alive. I saw him at the old decks with a small ship. Magra said. They were sitting in the kitchen, Luffy was asleep in his plate all bandaged up from the fire, but Ace wasn't paying attention to him, he was focused on Magra's words, thinking fast. I think he was planning a trip, but I can't be right, you kids are too young for the man continued, but Ace was already leaving with Luffy, this one's plate was broken on the floor. Ace was running as fast as his legs could pull him, he didn't have time. They didn't have time he thought, looking back at his little brother who managed to keep pace only because Ace wouldn't let his hand go. He wasn't about to leave him alone after he almost lost Luffy again, he couldn't let Sabo leave by himself, there was no way. The forest opened on the beach, and Ace or Ed, Magda was right. Sabo was still securing his boat, small dark vessel, when he got punched to the face. Falling into the sand he got ready to defend himself from the unprovoked attack, but then he stopped. The oil lamp was barely enough to see, but there was no mistaking them, Ace's furious form and Luffy, trailing not far behind. His younger brother immediately collapsed on the sand, panting, but Ace he looked absolutely furious. In retrospect he knew he should have expected that, Ace would absolutely hate the idea of being left behind, even if it was for his own good. Sabo couldn't stay in Dawn Island, he couldn't bear the idea of still being stuck with as a noble, not after everything happened. Sabo was about to say just that when Ace spoke first. "We're coming with you," yelled the freckled boy and Sabo could only stare. What? In the end not a lot of convincing was required, Sabo broke under Ace's glare and Luffy's tears as easily as a twig under pressure. If he was planning to leave and travel by himself, it would be really hypocritical of him to forbid his brothers from joining. He had stole enough food for him to last at least a month at sea, but with his brothers, he would need at least 4 times the amount, he wasn't even sure the ship could handle it. "We should leave tomorrow then, and we need to hunt for more food," Ace's punch still hurt and his glare was burning into his neck, but Sabo couldn't really fault him. He was too relieved to see them alive and well after the fire. "But we can't leave Sabo alone," protested Luffy, he will try to run away again. "Ow, Luffy, ow. I won't, I promise." Sabo tried to placate him, but his opinion didn't seem to be worth much at the moment. "Luffy, go with Sabo to get the food and our stuff, I'll guard the ship," said Ace, his voice was cold, his brother was still angry him, and Sabo nodded with a small smile. Luffy immediately sprung himself on Sabo's back, his limbs holding him tight. "I won't let him go, Ace. We'll come back and then we'll sail all together." There wasn't much to bring in the end, the cabin was filled with cooked meat, and the few belongings that were spared from the fire were fitted in one small chest. A couple of minutes after the preparations, they laid to sleep on the deck. Or, to be more precise, Luffy passed out the second his head hit the pillow, snoring loudly, while the 2 others didn't. One of Luffy's arms was coiled around Sabo, and on the other side of the rubber boy, Ace was showing them his back. Sabo knew he wasn't sleeping and decided it was time to apologize. He took a deep breath, staring at Ace's back. The nobles knew, all of them, about the fire. His voice wasn't much more than a whisper, but he saw Ace's shoulder twitching at the sound of his voice, so he continued. "I tried to warn someone, anyone, but people knew and they just didn't care. I didn't even know if you were alive. This country, these people, they're rotten." He continued, the memories flashing in front of his eyes, his voice getting thicker with emotion. Sabo tried not to think about it, when he stole the boat and bought it here, he focused on stealing the ship that would free him, he didn't think about what happened. The preparations for the arrival of the celestial dragon was actually a very good distraction, and people didn't pay attention to him as he led the ship out of sight. Now he couldn't escape the thought of his family being still in the city, he wanted to prove how wrong they were, to show them that one deserved to be treated like filth. If he saw his father or his mother again he feared he would just want to end them and everything they represented, thinking about Shelly's face even brought him some urges to kill. Sabo averted his eyes from Ace's back, looking at the sky. "I should have told you about it, but after I first got taken I couldn't face you, he said he would make sure you and Luffy would die and I listened." He could feel the tears rising to his eyes, he was still so angry. He didn't know if he actually hated the man, but it was the closest thing to it. The blonde was surprised to feel Luffy's limb tightening around his arm, the younger boy didn't say anything, Sabo couldn't even be sure he was awake, but his younger brother wasn't snoring anymore. A bubbling laugh left Sabo's lips, Luffy was really a treasure. He then noticed that Ace had turned around at some point and was staring at him. He wiped his tears and faced him, he trusted him not to throw him overboard, but his words could hurt way more than any of his punches. "Don't do it again," Ace said simply and laid to look at the sky. Relief flooded the blonde boy, he smiled brightly and laid on his back again to do the same. "I won't, I promise." Sleep was peaceful, and the three boys dreamt of their incoming adventures. In the end they decided not to warn anyone, they could be certain that Makino, the mayor and even Dayton would do everything to stop them. The idea was particularly hard on Luffy who was the most attached to the adults, but his brothers convinced him that they could always come to visit when they were older, and that settled the conversation. Barely 1 hour after departure, Luffy dropped a bomb. Who's gonna be the captain? Luffy was looking at them innocently. Silence greeted him for a few seconds, and as he decided to answer all brothers talked at the same time. It's very obviously it's gonna be, I think. Me? Said Ace and Luffy at the same time. They glared at each other, and Sabo closed his mouth shut. What are you talking about? I'm not going to let my baby brother be captain, no way. Said Ace. Yes way. I wanna be a better captain than you. Screamed Luffy. And Sabo and Ace planned to sail together when they came to age. They ended up deciding that Sabo would be the navigator and Ace the captain, but with Luffy traveling with them it couldn't really happen. Or it could, but Sabo would have to pick sides between his two brothers and he couldn't picture himself telling Luffy that he couldn't be captain. Sabo looked at the 9-year-old boy, his straw hat barely holding on his head, small, reckless, could barely fight. Indeed the youngest couldn't be captain either. Ace hit his brother on his rubbery head and the blonde made his decision. No way stupid, I'm the captain and Sabo is my navigator. Said Luffy hiding behind Sabo, he didn't want to be hit again. I want to be captain too, added this blonde, a very calm smile on his face. He stared at Ace, hoping he'd get the message. What? No way. Screamed Ace, looking betrayed, it went over his head, obviously. Disentangling himself from Luffy, Sabo explained. We beat the Tiger King together, didn't we? We can't sail alone anyway, so we'll have to settle for all of us being captains of this ship. We can be the ASL Pirates like on Goa. His two brothers stared at him for 5 seconds, then promptly started arguing with each other again. Sabo just sat down, giving up for now. Ace would eventually figure it out. It didn't take more than 3 minutes. Then I'll find my own ship and get my own crew. Yelled Luffy, tearing up and ready to jump overboard. Sabo panicked, standing up to stop him, but he was too far. Ace's eyes widened and fortunately he was close enough to catch his brother before he jumped. Hell no. ASL Pirates, we're the ASL Pirates. Ace yelled and Luffy pouted, not completely satisfied, but Sabo ruffled his hair. You can have your own ship when you're older, will be way easier to find a crew when you're already a famous pirate, wouldn't it? Luffy blinked and a wide smile replaced his pout, all was good. For now. The first storm was kind of unexpected. Sabo knew how to read weather patterns, but it wasn't his turn for the shift last night and he wasn't that good at reading the weather. Ace warned them before sunrise, not quite panicking but close enough. It took long enough for Luffy to be fully awake, that's why the two elders took matters in hand to be able to lead the ship out of the storm. The sails or the mast is going to break. Yelled Sabo over the wind as he was at the helm himself. Their rubber brother chose this moment to walk out of the cabin. Luffy. Called Sabo, go to the rudder and direct it for me, we need to get out of this storm. Still yawning and not as worried about the situation as he should be, Luffy obeyed, even though he didn't look like he knew what he was doing. Move it to the left. Sabo screamed over the wind, he could see Ace struggle with the sails, but was successful in binding them without falling. It took them a bit more than 40 minutes before they could relax, that's when Luffy fell overboard. It seemed like he simply tripped on some rope and that was enough to send him into the waters. Sabo saw it first and jumped into the ocean, he was able to see Luffy sinking fast, the anchor, but the blonde managed to pull him above. Ace threw them a rope and they got back on board. You stupid rubber brain. Ace punched Luffy's head. Ow. Be more careful next time, Lou. We're lucky we're out of the storm otherwise it would have been tricky to fish you out. Said Sabo more gently. Sorry said their youngest brother. But I know I can trust you guys to always get me back. Ace and Sabo looked at each other and the blonde sighed, they might have to tie the kid to the mast next time. The weather was rather calm and the two eldest brothers were sitting on the main deck. You say we're out of food, mumbled Ace, his face pouting at the empty barrel. Yeah we are, I wonder who ate all the rations I asked to keep for today. Shrugged Sabo in a tired voice even though it was a lie. Ace and Luffy did eat the last barrel last night, but Sabo managed to save the equivalent of 3 meals the day before, mostly dry meat and other non-perishables. He hid them in a secret cupboard near the helm. They will probably need the emergency rations one day with those two hungry dogs. If his calculations were right they should arrive by the next morning, they'll live until then. He had this responsibility to keep them alive with enough food because neither Luffy nor Ace would be able to keep the food stocks without stealing some for themselves. Greedy pigs. Life on the ship with his brothers was way different than back at the forest. Sabo had to use up way more restraint and maturity than ever before and it was slowly getting to him. He couldn't wait to arrive to their first island. Ace seemed to have noticed his bad mood and offered him a smile. "I'll have you know, Luffy ate almost as much as me." This sentence somehow got a laugh out of Sabo despite his initial annoyance. "You don't need to sound so proud, you rascal, now we don't have anything until tomorrow." Luffy jumped from the head of the ship, having heard their conversation. "No food," he whined, and then he was making his best puppy face at the blonde, but unfortunately for him, Sabo was fully immune to it by now. "Puppy eyes won't help the situation, Lou." He mumbled, pushing Luffy's face away with his palm. He wasn't using the rations until they were truly desperate. "We will need to buy some food with the money I have left, stolen from Goa. It's really too bad we don't have the treasure anymore." Old Burnt nodded Ace. They both sighed sadly, while Luffy kept pushing his face against Sabo's to try to get him to give up the food he smelled they had with his puppy eyes. "We need to fool the people at the harbor into thinking we're adults, any ideas?" added Sabo, trying to distract Luffy from food so he wouldn't be so insistent. "We could pretend we have a guardian in the cabins and he's sick," said Ace. It almost sounded reasonable, but a bit too suspicious seeing how small their ship was. "Hey, we could use our old disguise. You know, like back in Dawn Island," exclaimed Luffy. Ace snorted at that. "No way. Who would believe that? We didn't use this technique since we were 10, no way. It's stupid." Sabo thought about it and then looked at Ace with a huge smile. "Actually." Sabo sat on Ace's shoulders, quite comfortable. As the three of them would make a too tall adult, they decided only Ace and Sabo needed the disguise. Luffy would be their shy nephew who was instructed not to say anything. Or at least he should be when he stopped giggling. "Why?" complained Ace, his voice muffled by the fabric. "Luffy could carry you, but he has no sense of balance, and can you imagine him having to talk?" Ace grimaced at Sabo's wise words. "So why are doing the top half?" "Oh look, we're arrived, keep silent." He could hear Ace's curses and muffled his laugh, it wasn't the moment. The harbor was fortunately mostly empty this morning, and they were actually left mostly alone once they paid the fee for the state of the old man who kept the harbor this night. "Welcome to the Humming Isles," he mumbled, barely looking at them. They were on the biggest island from the small archipelago and they wouldn't need to visit the others. Once they were in the city, they removed the disguise and set up their plans. Ace agreed with Sabo that the dark-haired brother would be the one keeping Luffy's share, this one having no sense of money, and would stay with him. "Don't get out of my sight," Luffy mumbled Ace, taking his wrist and pulling him along. They needed supplies before they could leave the island. His ship was drifting around and there was nothing he wanted to do about it. It has been only a couple of weeks since he left the dojo, and thinking about it brought a very sour taste to his mouth. Kuina was dead and he could do nothing but keep their promise. To become the best swordsman in the world. Urano's Oro rolled around, staring at the wood of his boat. After her death he might have been too quick to lose his temper, he might have uselessly fought every single student and adult in the dojo and won, all the adults except for one. "I'm not fighting a grieving child," said the emotionless voice of his master, Kuina's father. The green-haired kid looked at the dark cloudy sky, it was still the middle of the day, but too dark for the sun to poke through. He closed his eyes. It's been already 4 days and he was getting hungrier and hungrier, the rain from the day before calmed his thirst, but he still wanted food. He started to regret leaving the dojo so early, how was he supposed to find money at 11 years old? Suddenly his boat stumbled against something, the boy stood up to look at what was going on. White sails, it looked like a merchant ship, taking his small bag of belongings he decided to climb on it with the idea of food in mind. Luckily no one seemed to notice the discreet small swordsman and he was able to find some barrels of fruits and fish. He feasted gladly, things were looking up. Sabo poked at the kid's cheek, it seemed to be efficient enough at waking him up from the shock. It was really weird, he thought, he was too used to Luffy's resilience, now he met a normal kid and accidentally pushed him to the ground. "Are you okay?" he asked as the pink head rose up from the floor. Yup, he was totally crying, Sabo sighed and helped gathering the kid's belongings that fell on the floor, a fishing rod, some clothing and a pouch full of coins. Sabo thought about it, then gave everything back to the pink head. He felt like he was above robbing a child unless he was a brat, but the kid stayed silent, still sniffing, not uppity noble then, he was done. "Okay, you look okay enough, see ya," said Sabo, his kindness quota was empty and he had stuff to do. Wait," said the kid, quickly wiping his face with a tissue and followed him. Sorry Sabo stared and waited. Why you're not from around here, are you?" I want to leave for the sea," he said, his voice sounding determined enough but his expression showed that he wasn't quite believing his own words. Sabo smiled, amused, the kid wanted a friend, he could do friend, he started walking again pulling him along, he could be a nice distraction. "Really? That's pretty cool. What's your name?" "I'm Sabo." His answer gave the pink kid enough confidence to answer him without stuttering. "Nice to meet you, I'm Kobe." FOOOOOD. Lemgolu. We're almost there. They just finished buying most supplies they needed and Luffy just remembered he was really hungry. And Ace was too, he decided. He kind of guessed Sabo hid some food on the ship but decided to let him deal with the stocks, he would trust him to keep them alive. Ace knew he himself couldn't really to resist the temptation. We're gonna get food, but we're not paying, got it? Dine and dash, remember? He said cheekily, bodily pulling Luffy's body away from his. The rubber boy still stuck to him, nodded happily until the sight of a restaurant caught his attention. Ace obviously hadn't bothered telling those plans to Sabo, but he was certain his blonde brother would appreciate his considerations for their finances and hopefully be done with his groceries by the time they were done eating. Otherwise, well, they'd have to run fast. Why yes. I want to be a marine. Sabo raised an eyebrow, that was unexpected. For a kid that young he was pretty ambitious. He wasn't that sure they took in children that young, so he wondered. The blonde also found the irony absolutely hilarious, he wondered if he should tell him he was a pirate. Why? Sabo asked Kobe. Because I want to be a hero, I don't want to be just a fisher like my dad. A hero, good luck, buddy, you need to be a lot stronger. But there's no marine bases on this archipelago if I recall. He chose these islands for a reason. Kobe nodded negatively. I have a bit of money and I want to buy a fishing boat to get to another island. Do you even know how to navigate? Sabo asked. Kobe's cheeks brightened, getting a laugh out of Sabo again. I'll figure it out, he looked like the thought of it would make him pass out. What about this, me and my brothers take you to the next island and you give us your money. You have a ship. But you're so young. Sabo laughed again at his expression, what a fun kid. He was about to answer when he saw something flying straight at him. Sabo wasn't fast enough to dodge and got hit. Fortunately, the bushes behind him softened his fall, he realized what the thing was, it was a Luffy cannonball. Luffy, what the F? Hey Sabo, hey, Ace said we need to run. Hi pink dude. The young boy said to them, still sprawled on his brother. Hello, Kobe started but was cut by the blonde. Ace said what did you do? We got some food, but we didn't pay and they got unhappy. Ace is losing them, let's run to the ship. Luffy laughed, standing up already, and Sabo sighed heavily, then looked at Kobe. My proposition still stands. The pink-haired hesitated, but Luffy didn't give him more time to answer and took his wrist. Let's go. He started to run, Sabo following them closely. It looked like Luffy took a liking to the new kid too. Ace was still running in the streets, these people were surprisingly resilient, more than the ones in Goa anyways. Since they didn't have a marine base, they still had their own trained militia, meaning he had a dozen of men in uniform after him. He could only hope Luffy was able to warn Sabo in time so they would be able to leave immediately. Ace turned around another building and jumped on some boxes over a wall and then brought the boxes down with his foot. This should slow them down enough. Unfortunately, a member of the militia apparently knew the streets better than him and appeared in front of the street he was heading to, but he was able to bring the man down by hitting him right between the legs. He winced internally, but he didn't show any mercy, better not be caught by those guys so early in his trip. He got to the harbor in time to see their ship departing and jumped on board, letting his bag full of food and supplies fall to the floor. Sabo was undocking the ship and Luffy was talking to a pink-haired kid, a stray, he wondered. He'd have to ask his brothers later, but now they needed to go ASAP. Ace climbed on the mast, they were smart enough to tie the sails and the flag this morning, so no one knew they were pirates. Now though, Ace unfurled them happily, showing their ASL flag on a black background. Ace drew it himself and was proud of it. Let's go. Screamed Luffy, full of joy, the other kid though was white with fear looking at their flag. You're pirates? You didn't say why you were pirates. He stammered accusingly at Sabo. The blonde barely paid attention and smiled. You didn't ask. Kobe suddenly realized something important. I was kidnapped by pirates, pint-sized pirates, he thought to himself, barely able to breathe. Luffy, as he told him earlier, was laughing heartily at him, but honestly didn't look all that threatening for a kidnapper, but Kobe was 8 years old, he was still a child and was terrified. Mostly of the dark-haired teen who was walking towards him and glaring. "IED, don't kill me, please." He passed by him and pulled Luffy by his cheek. What kind of stray kid did you bring, Luffy? Snow my fall Fabo fall, the mean teen looked at Sabo. It was a business proposal for money. What about what you did? How did you get the whole militia after you? Suddenly the dark-haired kid let Luffy go and looked pretty sheepish with a small smile on his face. We wanted to go to a restaurant, but they didn't let us, so we went in anyways and stole some food. He pointed the huge round bag laying on the floor. Sabo sighed and before he knew it, Kobe was witnessing the two teens arguing on the deck. Hey pinkhead. Luffy poked his cheek and he turned to look at him. I'm Kobe, he whispered, still worried about the teens behind him. Yeah, whatever, pink head, why are you here? Kobe blushed at the absurd question. You're the one who. No, we'd want to come with us. Kobe's anger cooled immediately and he stammered to give an answer, and the more he waited the closer the other kid got. I want to be a Marine. The best one. He added vehemently, his face was bright red, but he was happy he was able to get it out, even if he risked the mean teen's wrath. Luckily he seemed to still fighting Sabo. That's so cool. Said Luffy, and Kobe stared at him, not expecting that answer. I'm going to be the king of the pirates. We have a matching dream, pink head. The kid said, setting his straw hat back on his head. Matching? That's not, and I'm still Kobe, he mumbled, still taken aback from Luffy's words. Luffy didn't seem to hear him, distracted by the bag of food next to the other teens. He stretched on hand to catch a cooked chicken leg and munched on it. Aye. How did you do that? That. I'm a rubber man, I ate the rubber fruit. You what? Luffy found Kobe hilarious. He was smaller and weaker, but he was also new, so new and shiny and different from the other kids he could remember before Ace and Sabo. The pink head was just so scared, but he could see he was looking at Sabo a lot and obviously wanted to talk to his brother but didn't dare. When Luffy asked, Kobe blushed and said that Sabo was nice, not like the mean one, and Luffy told him, laughing, that his name was Ace and both of them were his brothers. Your old brothers? But you don't look. He stopped, nodded to himself and shook his head. Never mind. Shishishi, I don't get it, but you're really fun. We can go talk to Sabo now, he's probably hungry, let's get food. He pulled Kobe with him without asking his opinion and opened the stockroom. They didn't organize everything in barrels yet and the bag of food was still displayed on the floor and Luffy rushed to find some meat. But Luffy, we just left an hour ago, maybe we should ask. Kobe's stomach groaned and the kid blushed. Laughing and almost choking on his food, Luffy threw an apple at him. Kobe barely caught it and seemed to think about it for a couple of seconds before biting in. Once Luffy was satisfied, he found Kobe staring at him in disbelief, commenting on how much food he was able to eat, and Luffy took the bag of food for his blonde brother. I don't like the pink kid. Grumbled Ace, appearing behind Sabo at the cabin. He was done checking the ship and was supposed to stand guard at the crow's nest, but got absolutely restless, that's why he went down to the cabin to talk with his brother. Sabo was checking the map for the next island. The freckled teen looked at their trajectory from Dawn Island. It seemed like they somehow missed a couple of places, but were heading to a small dot called Shell Island. You don't? He's absolutely harmless. One eyebrow raised. Sabo leant up from the desk. I dunno, he wants to be a Marine, and he has a bad influence on Luffy. Things went too silent since Kobe arrived. Luffy usually spent all his time with him. Seeing Sabo's expression, Ace blushed brightly. I'm not jealous. I don't trust this kid to take care of Luffy. His hands turned into fists, ready to defend his claim. Sabo's smile just widened. I'm not saying anything, but I think you've been overprotective since the fire. You spent all your free time with him. Luffy needed a breather. Ace blinked at this claim, relaxing a bit but was still unhappy. Sabo put his pencil down and smiled cockily. I'm the one who should be jealous. When was the last time we actually sparred together, just you and me? Ace blinked and his annoyed expression turned into a challenging smile. You're so on. A couple of minutes later found them on the main deck, punching the hell out of each other, no weapons allowed. Sabo went seemingly easy on the dark head and Ace won the first spar. At the second one, Luffy and Kobe joined to watch them fight and Ace, being distracted by Luffy's food, got a kick on the head and lost the second brawl. Hey, my turn. The youngest brother left the food behind and wanted to join their brawl. Ace, kind of hungry, sat next to Kobe, who suddenly straightened like a bow, still terrified of the glaring teen. Like usual, Luffy tried one of his rubber attacks and actually managed to throw his pistol punch right, but Sabo dodged easily. You're improving on offense, Lou, wonder if you can take that. While Luffy's arm bounced back to him, Sabo took advantage of his loss of balance to give him a sold punch to the gut and the younger one groaned in pain, but to his credit didn't fall. Luffy tried to hit him with a gum no bazooka, but he was far too slow to catch Sabo, who swept his feet under him. I win again. You still did well, Lou, Sabo added gently, and Ace pushed Kobe forward. Your turn, Pinky. Kobe just stared at Sabo before turning white. Me? Don't you want to be a Marine? You'll need to be able to beat pirates up. Smiled Sabo, cracking his knuckles, finding his expression pretty funny. He wouldn't actually hit him as hard as he would Luffy, but the kid needed a wake-up call one way or another if he really wanted to be a Marine. Don't. Hey Kobe, fight me then. Sprung Luffy, behind Sabo, standing up like he hasn't just been punched and kicked to the ground. Yeah, fight Luffy. Smirked Ace, throwing a tomato at Sabo, and the blonde caught it easily, also hungry. He shrugged, biting into the fruit, sitting down next to Ace. Before he could take another bite, Ace fell asleep in a narcolepsy attack and Sabo got to steal some of his meat. Neither Luffy nor Kobe noticed, the younger one never fought anyone in his life and was absolutely livid at the idea of getting hurt. "Hey, don't worry, I won't be mad if you fight back. You're my friend, I want to help you to get stronger." Luffy's words were heartwarming for Kobe, who never had friends back in the Humming Isles. Hesitantly he copied Sabo's position at the beginning of the previous spar, almost tearing up but determined to at least try. Maybe Kobe should have removed his glasses, thought Sabo, munching on his chicken. On normal people, Luffy's attacks were pretty scary from the receiving end. Even he wouldn't want to get caught in that if he was perfectly honest. Fortunately, Sabo turned out to be fast enough to always avoid his blows. Who would have thought that a rubber fruit could be this useful? Not that he'd admit it to him, he'd be just too smug to hear that. After the first hit to his arm, Luffy's aim was off. Kobe surprisingly didn't give up, unlike what Sabo expected. He even tried to punch Luffy back, but he still held back. As much as he didn't want to get hit, he seemed even more terrified at the idea of hurting Luffy and attracting the wrath of his brothers. After getting a second hit to the face and falling to the ground, Kobe didn't stand up. His glasses were missing a lens, but it rolled not far from him and could be fixed. His black eye and swollen cheek though were turning into an ugly purple. Sabo was surprised with Luffy too. At first he went full in term of strength, but started to hold back his attacks halfway there, probably learning how hard it was to restrain himself. Overall it was a really good lesson for both of them. They would need to make it happen again. The merchants weren't so nice with people that stole their food, it seemed. Fortunately, they didn't notice before the next day when they docked to the new island. Zoro didn't even know what it was called and immediately ran towards the city. Didn't matter much to him where he was going, he knew he didn't want to experience this again. He needed a way to get money to be able to survive by himself. Zoro walked around for a while and a couple of hours later, walking in the city in circles, he somehow got into a bar, which was pretty weird because he was way too young to drink. He still walked in and asked for water. They wouldn't make him pay for it now, would they? And the barman looked at him briefly before giving him a glass. Zoro was relieved, he was getting tired and thirsty. "Hey kid, interesting sword you have here, would you sell it to me?" asked the man sitting to his right. Suspicious, the green-haired kid put his hand on his beloved Wado Ichimonji, like to protect it from any grabby hands. "No." He then finished his water, pretending he wasn't uncomfortable under the older man's gaze. He looked like a perfectly normal adult, dark hair and eyes, except for the scar on his nose and the tattoo on the right side of his neck and his green bandana. Actually, he looked nothing like a normal adult, he could even see some golden teeth behind his frigid smile. "Are you alone? You look like you need some help," the man said next, and he was giving him a really weird vibe. Zoro had enough listening to the man and stood. "No, don't need anything." He stood up and was about to leave, but noticed from the corner of his vision, the man raising his arm to hit him. He wasn't able to avoid the blow completely and fell to the floor. It would bruise, and Zoro was getting annoyed. "You're in the wrong kind of place, kiddo, you better give me your sword or..." Zoro didn't hesitate any further and sliced the man's raised arm before he could strike again. His scream getting everyone's attention on them, but as the man stayed on the floor, he shackled his sword. What a waste of time, he would have to clean the blood off Wado too. He kept an eye around them in case someone else wanted to try. Zoro was still good enough to beat any adult who bothered him. He didn't plan on staying around any longer though. "Thanks for the water." He mumbled and walked towards the door. On his way out, some poster pinned to the wall got his attention. Jimmy the Bandit, 1.5 million berry. It was a young man with a scar on his nose, a green bandana and a tattoo on his neck. He looked back at the bleeding man and it just clicked. On the other hand, maybe he would stay for a bit longer, Zoro smirked. Jimmy the Bandit finally stood up, finally getting over his shock, still bleeding and looking absolutely furious. "Boy. You're going to pay for that." Zoro got his sword ready, maybe he would be able to afford some new ones with the money of the bounty. He missed the three-sword style. The next couple of days were pretty peaceful. Luffy still spent a lot of time with the newcomer, but sometimes Kobe visited Sabo to see what he was doing. Navigation stuff bore the hell out of Luffy, and Ace was glad to help him with that. With Kobe's arrival, the sleeping arrangements needed to be changed, and Sabo ended up sleeping with the pink-haired kid in the first cabin because Ace didn't want to and didn't trust Luffy not to fall overboard with Kobe. It happened once, a couple of days before the Humming Isles. They all slept on the deck. Luffy fell into the water in his sleep and Ace still wasn't over it. This arrangement was alright in the blonde's opinion. Kobe didn't snore and didn't take much space, and everything was fine. Sabo looked at the barrel, remarkably empty. They would be out of food soon, again. They didn't plan for Kobe, who despite not eating much, was still a breach in their stocks, and that needed to be fixed soon. Interestingly enough, Kobe was the one who offered a solution. "I can fish if you want." I'm not an expert or anything but. Really teach me. Teach me. Exclaimed Luffy, Ace huffed, mumbling something about finally being useful and Sabo smiled approvingly. Kobe was also getting less and less shy the more days he stayed and sparred with him. He would be a good marine, he guessed, in a far future, with an excellent training, probably, with some luck. I didn't think of that. We do have a fishing net, but we don't know how to use it. Indeed, Sabo had found it in ship after he stole it, and when they first tried it, Luffy kept clumsily falling into the water. After his third swim, and since they couldn't keep him away from it, they just decided to give it up, but with Kobe teaching them, they might make it work. Ace grumbled something about checking their course, and Sabo just let him. They would be in Shell Island in a couple of days, their deal with Kobe would be over, and Ace would stop brooding. The letter trembled between his fingers, the paper slowly tearing up while he didn't even finish reading it. Don't have any news left to become pirates, not my fault. Wrote Dayton, and her distress didn't bring him any satisfaction. Monkey D. Garp was annoyed. How dare they leave like this after all he did for them? They were so young, why the hell would they want to leave this perfectly safe island? Unfortunately, the Marine Vice Admiral himself was still in Mariajoa, dealing with some important business Goku sent him to, but there was no way he was letting the kids to be pirates like this. Ace was 12, like his Sabo friend, and Luffy was only 9 for God's sake. He would send some Marines under his command and spread the word in East Blue. A recommendation letter from Garp himself should be a good enough motivation. He was hoping they would get stopped before they got themselves killed. This time, when he got a hand on those kids, he was taking them with him, they would become Marines no matter what. Multiple East Blue bases got a very important call about 3 lost children that Vice Admiral Garp would do anything to get his hands on. Descriptions were distributed and the chase began. Captain Morgan, newly commander of the 153rd branch of the city of Shell Town, received his orders as well and promptly ignored them. Why should he even care about 3 random kids? He had his own city now, and as the new taxes were put in place and the new reform solidified, he would be the most powerful of commanders. He still read the descriptions, just in case. What a boring island. Mumbled Luffy, looking at Shell Town. It was a pretty typical place for East Blue. It actually looked a lot like his hometown, not Goa, but the vibe was pretty similar to Dawn Island small villages, like Fuchsia. Behind him the Sabo Ace disguise was put on, this time Ace was doing the top half, while Sabo was hidden in the dark fabric. Kobe shared his doubts about this disguise. Anyone with brains would notice that it's 2 kids piled up. You'd be surprised how careful my face, Ace. Mumbled Sabo, who dodged another accidental kick. We almost never got caught. I used to be part of the disguise, but now it's too tall, and Ace says I'm not convincing. Luffy pouted. Kobe decided to just let them. He was anticipating joining the Marines, he really hoped they would say yes. Remember, they don't take anyone under 10, so you better lie about your age. As far as anyone is concerned, you're just a 10-year-old on the smaller side. Kobe nodded at Sabo's advice. They talked about it the day before, and the blonde managed to see the argument through, but he really didn't like it. The 2 kids and 1 weirdly shaped adult entered the harbor. A marine guard glanced at them briefly before returning to his conversation with a merchant. A small bald man asked them the docking fee, and as the new taxes required it, one in particular, the Morgan fee. Quite unhappy, Ace told Kobe to pay with his berries since he was the one they were here for, and he ended up giving almost everything he had. It was enough to buy a small boat. Why the heck was the fee asking so much, thought Sabo. In the end they didn't have any trouble, and after passing up another street, they found an empty one, and Ace and Sabo were able to remove their disguise. Why it's so expensive, mumbled Ace. Now your turn to pay up, give up the rest and go to your marine base. Kobe immediately gave the remaining of his berries up without any second thought. It was the deal after all, but Luffy didn't agree with Ace's plan. No way he leaves without a goodbye meal. Let's eat together and then I want to go check out the marine base with Kobe. Sabo pulled at Luffy's cheek, agreeing with Ace this time. We're pirates, Luffy, the less time we spend with him, the easier it will be for him to get hired. If he's associated with pirates, they're not letting him in. Luffy pouted, not letting Kobe's arm go. Lem eat with high leaves. Luffy insisted and Sabo released his cheek. Alright, 1 meal and his food goes on your tab, got it? Luffy's smile was worth it, decided Sabo, and while he could feel Ace's annoyance, he wouldn't comment on it. The 4 boys entered the small tavern they found not far from their street. A young waitress welcomed them and found a seat for the 4 of them easily. As she left to get their order, the kids noticed how strange the atmosphere was. Most people didn't look too bad off in general, but the mood was low and it was really silent for a tavern. Sabo elbowed Ace, whispering. Promise me we'll be paying for this one, we're not getting Marines on our asses. Plus Sabo didn't like the idea of robbing an establishment that looked like they needed it, they didn't even overprice the food, it was still very affordable. I promise, whatever, mumbled Ace, and the waitress came back. The young lady was called Ririka, and she indulged Kobe's question about the Marines. The word surprisingly brought an even darker mood to the tavern, and Ririka's smile was stained. The Marines are not very liked around here, she said lowly. Never mind then, mumbled Kobe, and their attention went back to their food. Yes, I'm the one who beat him. Can I have my money now? Zoro was pretty drained, having not only fought Jimmy the Bandit but also some customers from the bar who tried to take advantage of the situation. They got a couple of hits in, and he used Jimmy's bandana to keep his arm from bleeding out. He was quite annoyed to be forced to bring the unconscious adult man all the way to the Marine base he luckily could see looming of the bar's entrance. But the Marines didn't look like they believed him despite his injuries. Listen kid, you're too young to be traveling alone. Where are your parents? Asked another Marine, and Zoro scat at him, irritated. Don't have them. Can I have my money now? Just stop lying, there's no way you beat Jimmy the Bandit by yourself if you tell us who. If you don't give me my money I take him back. Zoro said warningly, but it completely went overhead the Marines who didn't expect him to be able to do well on his threat. A tall Marine interrupted their debate. He was Raffled, the lieutenant of this base, and was in charge while the commander was away. Zoro saw him as some kind of muscled beast, cropped brown hair, small blue eyes, and apparently bored to death if his voice gave anything about his personality. Fine, whatever, let's fight. If you win, you get the bounty. Kill my boredom and I'll even go easy on you. He cracked his knuckles and looked like he expected the kid to run away crying. Zoro was really annoyed from this awful day and from being underestimated so much. With a wicked smile, he accepted the duel, it would allow him to get off some steam. You didn't really tell us why you wanted to be a Marine. Ace's bored voice asked not long after Ririka was gone. They got served their food fast enough, and Luffy was already gouging himself like his stomach size had no limits. Kobe was starting to believe there wasn't. I want to be strong. To protect what I care about. Kobe said, stammering but forcing himself to say what he thought because that's what Luffy did, and Luffy was awesome. When he wasn't the equivalent of a vacuum cleaner, admittedly. Wait, wasn't his meat missing? The mocking voice that interrupted their conversation didn't come from their table. That's so lame. A blonde boy was sitting at a table near theirs, and they noticed he wasn't alone. A Marine was standing very still behind him. How didn't they notice him before? Who the heck are you? Asked Ace. Fortunately for them, Luffy seemed to be completely distracted by his meal and didn't hear what the blonde kid said. I'm Helmeppo, and my dad is Morgan, the captain commander of this island, so you better watch what you. Haha, look, his hair is so weird. Luffy laughed, his mouth full. Indeed, the blonde kid had his hair slacked in an interesting way, all while wearing some kind of small black suit that didn't really fit his small frame. Now his face was visibly getting redder and redder at the comment, and the Marine behind him seemed ready to act at any signs of violence. Kobe could see Ace's fist trembling. He looked angry, really angry, for him, but he didn't want them to fight Marines here, it would defeat their purpose. But before the pink-haired boy could try to placate Ace, Helmeppo ordered the Marine. Shoot them. It will teach the brats. Everyone in the room froze, Kobe's words dying on his lips. Do it. Or my dad will hear about this. Helmeppo insisted, and Ace was the one who ended it. He simply punched the blonde kid straight to the face. To be perfectly honest, before this whole scene happened, Kobe would have never dared thinking that Ace liked him or even didn't remotely dislike his existence. That was the feeling he got from the other kids since he joined them for this trip, and he never felt the shift happening. That's for insulting Kobe's dream, want another one for trying to shoot us. Ace glared, and terrified the kid looked at the hesitating Marine. His eyes watering, his mouth opened and closed, but seeing the adult still wasn't reacting, he seemed to decide to run away from the tavern. The Marine looked at them briefly, then followed after the kid. Kobe was looking at Ace, a mix of emotions displayed on his face. He was happy that Ace defended him so vehemently. He didn't expect that from the guy who looked like he hated his guts from the beginning. At the same time, Kobe was also displeased by him for punching the kid and relieved at the same time because the child ordered the Marine to shoot them. Too many emotions, and he didn't know how to deal with them. The last customers seemed to be paying for their food as fast as possible, relieved that no one got shot, but the place was still emptying pretty fast. Ririka came to them and immediately apologized. Oh, I'm so sorry dears, you should leave the island as soon as possible. The young Helmeppo is very serious about his claims. His father is the Captain Morgan, he would indeed send a small army to avenge his name. I'm so sorry it came to this. Of course her warnings didn't scare any of the pirate brothers, and only Kobe lost his colors. The situation was even worse than he thought. Shushi, don't worry about it. Said a very happy Luffy, still eating everyone's food, mostly Kobe's, but the pink wasn't even hungry anymore. How was he supposed to accomplish his dream now? How could he trust in justice anymore? He was livid. Hey Kobe, we can still go to another marine base, okay? Sabo tried, but Kobe didn't agree with that idea at all. He always believed Marines should be fair and just. They shouldn't use their rank as an advantage against their peers. Seeing the reactions of the other customers, he couldn't even say it came from just the kid. People here were terrified of the Marines, and Kobe just couldn't stand it. He stood from his chair and ran outside. Luffy followed after him immediately, and when Sabo looked at Ace, he pointed at the waitress who was watching the kids leave. Groaning, Ace nodded and Sabo followed Luffy. The freckled boy would take care of the tab. Zoro could feel the bleeding from his shoulder, the warm liquid seeping through his dojo uniform, ruining it for good. It was already more or less in pieces before, but he knew now that trying to sew it back wouldn't save the garment. When he gets the money that the lieutenant has promised, he would be able to replace what he was wearing. Maybe a white shirt for change, and he needed swords, 2 more of them. The young man wasn't all that worried about the Marine lieutenant anymore. The man's skill with a sword was pretty awful, even worse than the adults of the dojo. The only annoying part was that he was still strong, and any of his blows hurt way more than anyone else he'd ever fought. The blow on his shoulder was due to a mistake Zoro wouldn't reproduce. The other man's only technique was moving his sword around randomly. Now Zoro figured him out, it would be easy. The adult got grazed in multiple places, but he was still relatively confident. The kid knew how to use his weapon. So what? When he got pierced to the shoulder as well, his confidence lowered. He hadn't seen the kid move, then he saw the kid's gaze on him. Raffled kept trying to convince himself that he wasn't more dangerous than a child with a knife, but he could feel himself not even believing his own thoughts anymore, not after he looked at that kid's eyes. He could fully believe that the young man fought Jimmy the Bandit and won now, it was just a matter of pride. And Zoro knew he would defeat the man. He trained the sword for years, he knew the right technique to take down an adult twice his size. Maybe he'll need to use it multiple times, but this fight was over. The green-haired kid prepared just as the Marine prepared another slash. One sword style. Lion's song. In less than a second the young man was behind the Marine, just as a slash appeared on the Marine's chest. It was just too fast, and the lieutenant fell to the ground. Zoro found that he needed to work on it a bit more before it was truly lethal, but he would come around. Once he did, he'd allow himself to get the first earring. He got the idea from a story about a warrior he heard a while ago, and he took it for himself. 1 earring per sword, he aimed for 3, perfect. Can I have the money now? He asked the other Marines fussing over their lieutenant. The money was given and the first words about the bounty hunter demon kid were shared. Ririko loved Shell Town, she loved the city, the life of their small town. She knew every street, every hiding spot she discovered as a child. She was born here and if she could build a family and die here, she would be happy. The young woman still knew of her town's faults. It was too small to be called a city, they had no renowned history to attract visitors, and it was mostly living off trade from merchants passing by and the Marine presence that still brought them advantages in terms of security. Or it did, this town used to feel safe, but since the new commander arrived it wasn't that safe anymore. People feared pirates as much as they did Marines, and Ririka hated it. She knew it could be different, she could remember feeling safe to play in the streets as a child, as no one would dare rob anyone with such a strong Marine presence. She used to not be able to understand why children didn't play outside anymore. She used to be angry at the townspeople for being so passive, in a way she still was, but kept it locked. They should fight, they should defend their city, and if they did it together they might win. But no one listened to her, not to the small teenager girl that tried to rally them up. They heard her but didn't listen. It was too risky, too dangerous, they said. But now she could hear another voice supporting her wild claims, and she felt her hopes rising up again. The pink-haired kid wasn't even 10, and he spoke the same words she did. She wasn't sure why she followed them in the first place, maybe she was worried, maybe just curious, but as the crowd grew around them, she realized she wasn't the only one interested. Marines are not supposed to take advantage of people. Why do you keep listening to your boss if his orders are bad? The young boy said, despair and anger in his voice. She couldn't see his face, but she knew he was crying. She was also acutely aware of the villagers' glances at them, hesitating, thinking. Finally someone else says it. She thought, a small smile forming on her lips, echoing her rising hope. Maybe the Marines would listen to a child, as the saying said, from their mouth came the truth. Plus they hopefully wouldn't hurt children without orders. But the answer was cold and sad. Marines obey orders, that's how it is. As long as Captain Morgan is in charge, he has the right to do what he wants. Said one of the Marines with a somber look. That's not fair if the town hurts. The kid added, but the Marine wasn't listening anymore, and Ririka thought it was time to act up, to try something. If enough villagers talked them into it, surely something could finally change. You're supposed to protect people. She walked forward, her hands trembling. Ririka briefly wondered how the people could watch a child defend them, she couldn't, not anymore. The Marine didn't seem to know what to tell her and she felt powerful, like she was gaining ground. Then another Marine arrived, he had orders. They come from the tavern, right? Bring those kids in, Captain Morgan's orders. His face turned to her and she made a step back. Her too. Kobe was regretting his life choices. Well, not really, he couldn't really regret telling them a piece of his mind, but maybe he could have waited a bit or done it more privately. But he was just so angry. The pink-haired boy idolized the world government his whole life. He saw a Marine saving a kid's life when he was 6 and then freed the Humming Isles from a band of pirates. Marines were heroes, they were fair, they weren't supposed to take advantage of this strength. Kobe knew it wasn't right, and yet. Kobe made a step back as the 7 Marines turned their full attention to them. The waitress's presence surprised him, he didn't expect anyone to support him, he just wanted to get his mind out here. And he noticed how close Luffy was either. Sabo was here too, they followed him out of the tavern. He wasn't alone, he shouldn't be so scared, but he still felt horribly bad. The kid was still crying behind his glasses, out of frustration and guilt, because the first pirates he met were so nice and awesome, and now they were in danger because of him. Not even counting the nice waitress, what was he supposed to do? Luffy and Sabo were stuck with him, surrounded, and it was his fault. He couldn't even fight to try to help. He was sure he couldn't hurt an adult, he wouldn't even know how to start. "Hey Kobe, it's okay," said Luffy's voice, and he looked up at the boy with the straw hat. The kid was barely a year older than him and he wasn't afraid of anything. Kobe was envious of this attitude because the pink-haired boy could never stop himself from thinking. He couldn't stop being afraid. "We'll fight them off, Kobe, and then we can kick Mogi's ass." "Morgan, Luffy, his name is Morgan," mumbled Sabo half-heartedly. The blonde wasn't as optimistic as his brother that they would be able to stop the commander, plus they had no real reason to fight the guy really. They were pirates, not heroes. He would try to convince Luffy otherwise, but it was not the time, he could do that later, they had people to fight first. To Sabo's surprise, it wasn't their group nor the Marines who made the first move. The first rock was thrown by a villager and the Marines couldn't tell who did it at first. A second followed very fast and they found themselves dodging multiple projectiles from all directions, a bit too close to them, Sabo thought, but welcome all the same. Sabo jumped on the occasion and hit the first one between his legs with his pipe before he could react. The Marines were too busy paying attention to the villagers to notice his actions immediately, and Luffy got to punch another Marine in his gut with his gum-gum pistol, not the Marine he aimed at but same difference, and when the group of Marines realized they were actually under attack, there was only 5 Marines left standing. Sabo was not really synchronized with his brother. Luffy wasn't all that good at the teamwork thing just yet. Sabo always worked better with Ace, but his young brother was learning. Kobe was really impressed with them, he saw them fight before with each other, but never in a team, and their team takedowns had him impressed. 3 Marines left until one of them pulled a gun. Wait. Luffy, careful, he has a gun. He yelled. He couldn't fight an adult himself, but he couldn't picture Luffy getting shot. The sound of the pistol echoed in the almost empty street and Kobe saw the gunshot literally bouncing off Luffy and hitting another Marine Luffy was fighting. The pink-haired boy's mouth opened wide and he realized what happened. His rubber powers saved him. Then Luffy screamed. It hurts. Sabo kicked the man that shot Luffy to the face until he fell into unconsciousness, bloody but still breathing, leaving only 1 Marine standing. "Oh my god," mumbled Ririka, sitting next to the fallen kid. She hadn't seen what happened either. "Luffy, are you okay?" asked Sabo. His voice was tense and he didn't look away from the Marine. This one looked younger than the others, he stayed behind during the fight. When the blonde glared at him, he decided to cut his losses and just ran away. Kobe got to Luffy and Ririka, checking the damage to Luffy's belly, and indeed he had a small bruise but nothing else. He let a sigh of relief. "How did you do that?" asked Ririka, in awe. "I'm made of rubber, but still, ow, it hurt almost as much as when Gramps hits me." Kobe blinked. Okay, Luffy might really be fine. "Wait, Gramps?" He wasn't aware they had family. "I didn't see the gun bulletproof. That's pretty useful," added Sabo, trying to use a light voice, but he staggered with a sigh of relief. He must have been as terrified as Kobe was. "Okay, we should get out of here before more Marines come," the blonde said, and Kobe agreed with him, but Luffy stubbornly didn't. And he could see that Ririka hesitated as well. Marines were looking for her too, and Kobe felt ashamed for trying to escape this island's problems. "What? But we need to go and fight Mogi, you're not hurt, are you?" he asked Sabo. "Morgan, Lou, his name is Morgan, and no, we can't fight him." "Why not?" His inquisitive voice sounded too innocent. Kobe could believe that he honestly had no idea why they shouldn't. He was actually slowly getting to agree with Luffy, the waitress being the reason. Because of him she was a target, he couldn't just abandon the nice woman. As they tried to make Sabo change his mind, they realized that they were getting surrounded by way more Marines than before, and the three boys took a fighting position, while Ririka and Kobe just stayed behind, struck by fear. This was a really troublesome situation. Ace finished counting the money for their meal to the owner of the tavern. He thought it was a real shame cause the man wasn't even there. And Ace didn't waste any time to make himself scarce as well. He guessed that Marines were looking for them after his little stunt with the blonde jerk. Then he realized he had no idea where to go. He left the tavern and went around the village. They wouldn't go near the Marine base, right? The streets were surprisingly empty and he was getting a little worried. Kobe did look upset when he left, but it was just Kobe, how bad could it be? Pretty freaking bad, he guessed once he followed the crowd to the village center, the Marine base 100 meters or so from them. Kobe, Luffy, Sabo and the waitress lady, Ririka were surrounded by Marines, and the big bad Captain Morgan himself was facing them with a smirk. Ace was itching to join the fight, but since no fight was happening yet, he stayed back to check on the situation. Vice Admiral Garp promised a nice sum and a reputation for the one who would capture his grandsons. Honestly, if it wasn't for this one straw hat, I would never have suspected you kids. Ace's face went white. Luffy's expression was terrified. Sabo hid his face in his hands. "God damn it," Luffy mumbled Sabo, his voice muffled. Ace sighed. If the situation wasn't so dire he would have punched his little brother himself. Sabo's pinch to his cheek would do for this time. Yeah, there was no way they were getting caught by this guy to be given to Garp. The old man would kill them if he caught them. Ace rounded the place to see if he could find a way out until he saw a very familiar smirking teenager. That will do. Ace sneaked behind the blonde boy and after knocking out the Marine soldier who guarded him, a swift metal pipe to his temple, he stole his gun and pulled Helmeppo to his chest to threaten him with it. "No one moves," he yelled. Luffy's happy yell of relief swelled some pride inside him, and Cody's terrified and disapproving face was just a precious bonus. If he was honest, he had no idea how to use this gun thing, but it was fine cause he was really good at faking it. Good enough for Helmeppo to start sobbing in his arm too. Everyone was looking at him now and he felt exceptionally proud. He was the master of the show, hell yeah. Yeah, Ace decided, he liked the attention. 1.5 million berries. It was more money than he ever held in his short life and yeah, nothing. At least he was now sure he wasn't interested in it at all. He'd need the goods, food, swords, clothing, that comes with it, but for the money itself he couldn't care less. He only had one objective in mind and would stop at nothing to reach it. Money couldn't buy him the best swordsman in the world spot. He finished his meal quickly enough. He was smart enough to hide a good portion of his money from people. He wouldn't underestimate human desperation after last time. Zoro walked for a while and the town moved twice before he found the right shop. The night was falling soon, but the clothing shop was still open luckily enough. The clothing was pretty bland, but sold what he needed. He got a white shirt, some dark pants, dark boots, a bit big, but he'll hopefully grow into them. He kept the bandana of Jimmy, a bit bloody but a good memory. He still purchased a long red scarf he turned into a haramaki for his sword. Hopefully he'd have more to add to it soon enough. The owner from the shop was nice enough to lead him to the inn. "It's pretty dark, it wouldn't do for a young man your age to get lost." Zoro shrugged it out and got another plentiful meal before going to sleep. Maybe having money wasn't all that bad. He'd need to find more bounties before the money ran out. He should have guessed with Morgan's awful attitude, but really he was hoping for a bit more. The man didn't give any crap about his child and something in Ace's stomach churned awfully. "You can kill him for all I care, if he got caught he deserves to die." How cruel. With disappointment and displaced anger, it could have been an easy getaway. He pushed him to the ground to let the blonde go. It wasn't like he was a menace anyway. The sobbing blonde ran towards his father but got immediately slapped to the face, passing out on the dirt, and the situation wasn't getting any better. That is until the waitress Ririka somehow got brave enough to face the man. "Why? Why do you feel the need to oppress the city and its inhabitants? How can you call yourself a marine when you're hurting us as much as pirates do?" Ace could see she was tearing up, probably picturing her own death after such demonstration, but the freckled boy was in awe. She was absolutely badass. That wasn't Morgan's opinion apparently because he immediately raised his axe fist to slash at her. Sabo immediately went to shield her with his pipe, but someone else reacted first to stop the commander. Ace didn't recognize him, but the man looked like some kind of swordsmith with his leather apron. He was holding a crowbar, and if his bulging muscles were any indication, his ability to stop the hit was genuine. He was pretty strong. "Imano-san," said Ririka, surprised, but Kobe soon enough pulled her by her wrist so they could get out of here. They were both out of their league, and as more villagers joined in the fight, it was turning into a full-on battle. Ace joined Sabo and Luffy, the three of them breaking havoc and protecting Kobe and Ririka. A dozen Marines weren't numerous enough or even willing enough to fight against the army of villagers, and most of them surrendered or got knocked out. How dare you? Miserable insects. Soldiers, if you refuse to fight them you must kill yourselves. Right now, it's an order. Morgan yelled, slashing at the swordsmith who started bleeding profusely from his shoulder. No villagers actually dared facing the man, but the commander already had a target in mind, the woman who dared facing him in the first place. Seeing the man approaching, Kobe couldn't do much but dodged the first swipe by falling to the floor and hiding his head. He thought he was so dead, but Sabo countered Morgan's swipe while Luffy clumsily punched his iron jaw, which didn't do much, but he managed to aim right this time. Seeing Luffy was now vulnerable, Morgan attempted to swiftly catch the boy but got a pipe to the side of his head. He hadn't seen the third kid jumping behind him. Ace got a solid punch to the face for his bravery, but Sabo hit the adult between his legs for his distraction. Morgan had a pretty good pain resistance ratio in general, but even he folded in half when he got hit there. Ace was swaying and bleeding from his nose now, it was probably broken, but he wouldn't lose the opening that Sabo offered him and hit Morgan's head a second time. In the meantime Sabo was able to pull Luffy away and Ace retreated as well. The freckled boy hurt pretty bad, but he wouldn't give up the fight now, not with his brothers facing the man. The Captain Morgan looked absolutely furious now, his bloodshot eyes would give the young Kobe nightmares for a while, in fact he was bleeding from his temple pretty badly, but didn't look like he was giving up any time soon. Nodding to each other, the three brothers went to attack him again, even if they didn't look like much, they knew that they could wear him out eventually, and they were right. Sabo might have fractured a couple ribs when the man got him with the blunt side of his axe, Luffy wasn't able to completely dodge a swipe to his arm, and Ace's head was spinning badly from another punch to his head, but the man was down, and everyone was cheering. Ace let himself fall to the ground, his head hurt way worse now the adrenaline wasn't pumping anymore. He closed his eyes and slept. She'd been sailing for 4 days now from the last island now, and she looked at the future with dread in her stomach. The past 2 hours the storm had been raging and she was getting desperate, she didn't know how long her small boat could handle it, and once the water swallowed her. Blinking her tears away from the wind, the salty wind, nothing else, she thought about her sister, her village. She would do this for them, she couldn't die here. With renewed energy, she pulled at the rope to hold her boat steadier, she would handle this storm and get to her destination safely, yes she would, there was no other alternative. She landed on a deserted beach at dawn, exhausted but in one piece. Her boat wouldn't be able to sail anymore, but she was safe, and she was sure she arrived to the right island. She knew that the Orchid Kingdom was big enough to be called a small continent, and she was hoping to find help here. The rain was still pouring, so she didn't dare taking the risk of checking her map. She wouldn't forgive herself if she damaged a precious item, she sighed removing the wet hair from her face. The young girl didn't take that much supplies to come here, most of the food was already consumed, and except for some navigation supplies and spare clothing, she didn't take anything. There wasn't much to take anyways after. She shook herself from her thoughts and went for cover. From where she was she could see a path probably leading to a village, that's where she would start her search. The tavern was pretty animated this evening, Luffy spent the time after the fight getting thanked by villagers and stuff, then they got taken care of for free by the doctor. It was interesting cause Luffy couldn't remember even visiting one before. Doc bandaged his arm, and it hurt so much when he poured the antiseptic something, fortunately Ace wasn't here to see him cry like a baby. Sabo was but Luffy was way more worried when he saw how hurt he was on his stomach, the bruises were ugly to look at, but the doctor was optimistic enough. Just don't move too much and you'll be fine, your other brother will need a couple of weeks to be healed thoroughly. The damage to his nose isn't too bad and it set back easily, but his head was cracked pretty bad when he hit the floor. That's why they couldn't leave yet, despite the threat of Gramps looming on them as Sabo was reminding him. As he sat and ate after the doc left to take care of some hurt villagers, Luffy thought that endless free meals was a nice way to thank them. If your grandpa is after us we will leave as soon as possible if we're at sea, he can't really know where we're going and can't find us. Sabo's words reminded him of something Mogi said before the fight. Mogi said his 3 grandsons, so you're part of his grandsons too now. Guess he adopted you too shushi laughed Luffy, and seeing Sabo horrified expression only laughed harder until he choked on his food. The blonde was quick to slap it better, and Luffy barely paused before getting another handful of meat down his throat. Kobe was animatedly talking to Ririka at the bar, apparently they were good friends now, and Luffy was happy for him, he had more friends now here, and the whole city seemed pretty happy about them, even the Marines. Luffy had wondered if they knew they were pirates, he wanted to remind them, but Sabo would punch him again if he did, it happened once when he told Ririka, he didn't want to get hit again. Even if later in the evening, Luffy promptly forgot not to tell their plans to leave the island to Ririka and Kobe, but she laughed. She wouldn't try to stop their thirst for adventure. Kobe told them he was going to stay with Ririka until he was able to join the Marines. Sabo had huffed that he didn't need to wait until he was of age, but Kobe explained. I want to be strong enough so they will have to take me in no matter how old I am. If I'm that good they won't have a choice. He smiled brightly and he wasn't even stammering much anymore and Luffy was really happy for him, he needed to hug him again. Leaving his food behind, minus what he already had in his mouth, he latched onto his embarrassed younger friend, he would miss him a lot, but he was sure they'll see each other again when he'll come to chase after them. It was going to be great. He was looking forward to it. Finding a weapons shop was way harder than finding the clothing one, and it had nothing to do with the way the town kept moving. He ended up asking at the inn that he found around the corner for the third time if they had anything of the sort. They, in fact, didn't, but the owner knew an old woman who had a vast collection of swords she collected in her youth, and Zoro found himself very reluctant in trying to find her. "Lem get you a map, she lives right next to the docks," despite knowing that it would be useless, people obviously didn't know how to make good maps, he accepted it and went to find her, but he didn't even get to the docks, getting lost in the forest for a couple of hours. That is until a young fisher named Hook found him, and after getting a look at his map, he accepted to lead him to the house of the woman. "You're not from here, are you? Why are you going to Baba's home? What are you doing in Costco Island?" Was that the name of the island? Probably. Hook was way too energetic and questioning for the green-haired's liking, but he was helping him so he could indulge. "Looking for swords. I'm a bounty hunter." Since yesterday Zoro didn't say but it was all the same to him, and Hook laughed. "Haha, careful, Baba's not selling the merchandise unless you have lots of money." "Ma, I didn't know bounty hunters started so young." "Unfortunately for you there's not a lot of criminals around here, nothing to rob to be honest, they don't tend to stay long. Most bandits tend to gather around Shell Island or Ramba Island, one has an uncaring marine presence, while the other let's say it's not visited very often, since they removed it from maps a couple of years ago, there's rumors about a treasure, but I wouldn't bet on it, people tend not to come back from Ramba." He must have been lucky with Jimmy then. He was surprised by his next words, but not curious enough to ask about it, but he needed to get to Shell Island if Hook was telling the truth. "How do I get to Shell Island?" Hook scratched the back of his blonde head. "Funny you asked, my uncle, a merchant, is going there in a couple of days, if he's paid he wouldn't mind taking you along, I mean if Baba hasn't robbed you blind." 3 hours later, Zoro weighted the metal in his hand, it took him more than an hour to find the right swords, and at least twice the time negotiate. Not because he wanted to hold on to his money, but because the old woman witch wanted to buy Wado Ichimonji from him, something that wouldn't happen before she took it from his cold dead hands. The whole ordeal had been annoying and embarrassing, but Hook seemed to find it absolutely hilarious. Enough for Zoro having to resist his more violent urges, but he stopped himself because the other guy let him stay at his place until he could leave. He had only a couple of hundred berries left, meaning he would barely be able to get enough to get either enough food or get his ticket for Shell Island with Hook's uncle. Maybe if he didn't eat he would be able to make it. What's a couple of days without food anyway, he'll be fine with water. All he wanted now was to finally get out of this shitty island. 3 days after liberating the island, during one of his visits to the clinic and when Kobe expected it the least, Ace woke up and the first thing he asked for was food. Then when Kobe led him to the clinic's kitchen, all he did was inhaling it to an abominable rhythm. At least he wasn't choking on it too much. "I mishead 15 meals," he explained, his mouth full of bread and meat, wasn't that 5 meals per day. Kobe would never get used to it, even if he lived with Ace and his brothers for a couple of weeks. The younger boy told him what happened after he passed out after the fight without prompting. Despite Ace not stopping his eating speed, he knew his attention was on him when he told him that Morgan got his axe prosthetic confiscated and was imprisoned at the Marine base. At least, thought Kobe, the older teen seemed to be faring better than the deathly pallor Kobe remembered when he fell. Ace looked fine now, even if he couldn't ignore the white band around his head, it twisted Kobe's stomach something awful, and it had nothing to do with the way he ate his food this time. "Also I wanted to apology I mean thank you for. Schave. Ace cut him for the first time, looking at him with a more serious expression. "That's what Fryinch do." The pink hair didn't miss the small smirk the teen offered him and he felt incredibly happy about it. "Alright." He answered with a wide smile of his own until he remembered something. Oh and I have to warn you, Sabo and Luffy are going to kidnap you as soon as they see you. I think it has something to do with your grandpa." With a couple of muffled curse words Kobe immediately wanted to forget, Ace ate even faster if it was possible. The younger boy thought about admonishing him for it but immediately gave up. Ace wouldn't listen to him, but maybe he would to his brothers. He left Ace to his eating and went to tell the other ASL brothers that he was awake. He briefly wondered about the grandpa thing, he wasn't sure what it was about, the brothers obviously feared this figure and Kobe decided he didn't want to know about it. It was pretty late at night, but the moonlight was shining on them clear as day. Ace and Sabo dragged a bag of food twice their size each in the streets. Luffy was holding on the bag of money he and Sabo stole from the marine base while Ace had been sleeping. Usually Ace would be the one holding it, but they swapped when Luffy tried to eat what was inside the bag while they were running. Unlike Ace and his head wound, Luffy and Sabo were practically healed. The blonde was still careful about bending forward, and the youngest was using his unhurt arm for the money, but they were in good shape for sailing already. Ace still had a headache, but he wouldn't admit it under torture. The doctor gave him some pills for his head and some narcolepsy pills when found Ace asleep in his food after Kobe left. The doc still cleared him for light exercise, even though the three of them ran away the same evening. Luffy missed it with his lightheadedness, but Sabo noticed immediately how the town seemed to have decided they would live with them, that they were too young to sail, and would probably have tried to keep them there. The streets were quite empty at this hour, but once they got the ship they noticed two figures waiting next to their admittedly small ship. "Kobe?" asked Luffy with a wide smile, and the pink-haired waved at them. Next to him, Ririka was smiling, she seemed to be holding a bag of goods, Sabo checked, mostly non-perishable foods. It didn't seem like they actually needed it, but Sabo accepted it with a wide smile. "It's to thank you again, even if you didn't do it on purpose, you saved our town." She kissed the three boys' foreheads. Both Sabo and Ace brushed brightly, while Luffy offered her the brightest smile. Ririka noticed the money Luffy was carrying, but turned a blind eye, she owed them at least that. Kobe on the other hand started a small lecture once Luffy told him where he got it. "We're pirates, Kobe, you can try to arrest us when you're a marine, too bad you're not one yet," teased Ace. The pink blinked and scratched the back of his head, he had a point, they were pirates, it wasn't like his lectures had any meaning to them. Then I'll do it. I'll find you when I'm a strong marine. I will be an admiral." Ace and Sabo smiled and embarked the food on the ship while Luffy faced Kobe with a proud smile. "And I'll wait for you on the top. I'll be king of the pirates." Shishishi, he laughed and jumped after Ace and Sabo, he almost fell, but Sabo caught him by the elbow to prevent his brother from stumbling overboard. Kobe laughed and waved at them, tears pouring on his face, he would miss his first friends a lot. He kept waving until they were out of sight. He and Ririka stayed a couple more minutes and the sun started rising on the horizon. "Let's go home," she said and Kobe nodded. Hook had immediately caught on Zoro's diet and arranged things so the green-haired kid could work on the ship for payment and Zoro accepted the deal. It was just some menial tasks anyway, carrying boxes, cleaning the floor, nothing hard really, and anything could be turned into training if he put his mind into it. He wasn't asked to clean the floor again after the first time, weirdly enough. The merchant ship was still quite impressive, he'd never been on one this big, with more than a dozen of sailors leading it. They've been traveling for 2 days from Major Island when Zoro got a very bad feeling in his gut. He was holding some rope he was told not to let go, and he looked around. It didn't look like it had anything to do with the ship itself, or even with the crew. Zoro watched the ocean, the sea was pretty calm, the wind blowing the ship forward easily, so why was he so? "Thanks Zoro-kun, could you please go help cook?" With his next words were completely silenced with a scream from the crow's nest. "The pirates. Pirates are following us." Zoro tensed, his hands reflexively going to his sides, but they only caught empty air. The green-haired cursed just as the sailors started panicking, while Zoro went to the cabin to get his swords. When he came back to the main deck he saw the pirate ship, the dark flag with the Jolly Roger was unmistakable, it was a strange variation with a sideways shark's call instead of a human one. Their ship was also much smaller and faster than the vessel he was in, meaning there was no way to get out of this without a fight. As the first cannonball hit the ship, he slid Wado Ichimonji between his teeth and prepared to fight. What else was there to do anyway? Their first night to the sea was pretty calm. In fact, the second they left the surroundings of Shell Island Luffy and Ace fell asleep in a heap together. Sabo had started to think that unlike Ace, Luffy didn't actually suffer from narcolepsy, but he'd been following and copying Ace since they met. He wouldn't be surprised if Luffy's narcolepsy was just some kind of mirroring mechanism. He saw Ace falling asleep at random times and decided he could do the same, he wouldn't put it past Luffy not to realize that Ace's predicament was an illness and not just a quirk. Sabo still decided to let them rest, the sea was pretty calm and the wind was only getting kind of fresh, bringing the end of the summer. He put his trench coat on. The blonde watched the rising sun, then went to add a new entry to the captain's journal while sitting on the deck. Since technically the three of them were co-captains, as far as they could agree with that, they could all write in it, yet Sabo tended to be the only one to care. Sabo and Ace made sure that Luffy could kind of read and write, but he was just too super active to be able to stay still with a pencil. Ace tried to write something, but at his first attempt, he got a narcolepsy attack on the journal, smudging the page and his face with ink. And the second time was just a couple of days ago, and he just went on a rant about Kobe's presence on the ship. Quite entertaining to read but not very useful. Sabo wrote down their trip and adventure on Shell Island, if it could be called that. It was their first real encounter with dangerous forces, and yet Sabo loved it, not as much the fighting part, but defeating an evil guy was exhilarating. They freed the town, and it gave him an important feeling of satisfaction. Plus, the villagers went and contributed beating up Marines because they wanted to be freed from Morgan, and they ended up saving themselves, even if they needed a bit of help. The relief on Ririka's face, the town's cheering, just writing about it, brought a smile in Sabo's face. He hoped they would find more places like this. They might not always be able to help, but the blonde would do his absolute best because freedom was the most important thing he could think about. That and his brothers, of course. Luffy stirred first, and Sabo knew Ace would follow soon because there was no way their younger brother would stay silent. Luffy yawned and tugged at Sabo's coat. "Hey, why is the moon orange?" asked Luffy sleepily, not that loud, but in between the silent waves it was loud enough. "It's the sun, Luffy," answered Sabo with an exasperated tone. He did try to teach him some physics and astronomy at some point, but he just couldn't stay in place, and even when he did, usually after some kind of injury, he always had issues with the understanding part. Sabo gave up, but he had no problems answering his questions. "Then why do we still see the stars?" Luffy asked again, confused. "Because the sun is only rising, its light will reach the other side of the sky soon." Sabo put his pen down. It was enough introspection and writing in one go. He could hear Ace groaning in his sleep and pulled Luffy with him. Ace was still hurt and needed the rest. "Let's go check our supplies and sort out the food. Separate the easily spoiled food from the rest." But the mention of food, Luffy was already agreeing. With Ririka and Kobe's addition to their supplies, he could let his little brother steal some. Sabo smiled. All in all, it was a pretty great day. He should have known it was a shitty day from the start. The pirate attack was really nothing to scoff at. So much more different from a duel on land. As soon as the first pirates boarded, the sailors took arms to defend their lives. The fighting started and Zoro felt kind of overwhelmed by everything. People fought all over the place, and his first target was the first pirate that approached him, a laughing man with a dark beard. But while he was fighting him, another with a wooden leg tried to slice him from behind. The swordsman's shame. Zoro committed his first murder, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't even remotely close to enough. They were completely outnumbered. By the time Zoro defeated 5 more pirates, he was shot at his side from behind, through and through. By then, most of the sailors he spent the last 2 days with were either dead or severely injured. There was nothing he could do about that. He wasn't strong enough. Really, the only other sailor from the merchant ship still standing was another light-haired young man. He was fighting only with a bat, but while he had some cuts on his arms, it looked like he fared good enough. He didn't look older than 13. The pirate captain of the ship, a gray-haired man with a long shark-like nose, ordered his men to stop and smiled cruelly at them. "You're both pretty strong kids. One of you can join my crew, the other will die." He could hear the unsaid rhetorical question underneath because the other pirates immediately started yelling for them to kill one another, and while Zoro usually appreciated a good fight, there was nothing to enjoy about this situation. The only other survivor was looking at him with terror and determination while the pirates booed at them. Zoro grit his teeth and made his decision. He sheathed his 3 swords slowly, staring straight at the captain. "Why would I want to join your shitty crew? Haha kid, funny, if you don't, you die." The green-haired kid's eyes flashed with anger. Screw that noise. He could almost see some of the men recoiling slightly at his expression. "Then, it's gonna be on my terms." Zoro climbed on the fence of the ship and let himself fall overboard, letting the waters claim him. It was the worst day ever, decided Ace, pulling on the rope to fold the sails up, following Sabo's indications. The freckled teen was on watch for the first half of last night. Luffy was supposed to stay for the other half, but Ace hadn't been able to find him. The youngest brother was found this morning sleeping in one of the empty barrels because, Ace assumed, he didn't want to do his part of the job. Ace had been pretty pissed, mostly because Luffy had pulled that thing off before. Ace had thought that being threatened not to be given any meat for 3 days was enough for Luffy to be more responsible. It wasn't. Then Luffy had been of course insufferable during the day too, asking for meat until Sabo explained him calmly why he was punished. In the end, Ace hadn't been able to sleep either way because an awful storm broke out. Now he was absolutely ready to pass out at any minute. This situation was really the worst. They never encountered a storm that bad, and Sabo looked like he was at the verge of panic. The blonde was looking frantically at the sky, trying unsuccessfully to get them out of the storm. Ace knew that without a good navigator, they would have lost this battle long ago, but he really wished they were better prepared to those situations. If they survived, they would learn from the experience and find more cremated or a better ship. Not far from the blonde, Luffy was holding the wheel desperately, listening to Sabo with an unusual air of seriousness. He had a rope around his hips tied to the mainmast. They wouldn't take risks. Down here he should be safe enough. Ace was still quite angry about Luffy's actions the night before, but he also way more worried about his brother's survival. He should have been the one to explain why Luffy's actions were wrong, he shouldn't have hid behind Sabo. Yeah, Ace decided he would tell him, assuming they managed to get out of this storm. Ace wiped his forehead where his hair had stuck to his skin. He was also quite cold, open to the elements, the rain soaking him to the bone, and the wind just making him colder. He didn't get colds very often, but he hoped it wouldn't come to this. It's been an hour they were fighting it, and the storm didn't seem to be stopping at all, but from where he was, Ace saw something that lifted his spirits. Land. Sabo. There's an island. Screamed Ace at the top of his lungs, pointing to the direction he saw the island-shaped dark spot, relief flooding his voice. Holding the wheel now, Sabo's face brightened, and he said something to Luffy he couldn't hear, but the ship started to tilt toward the island. They would be safe, finally. The island wasn't as small as he thought, it was actually pretty big, but they had no time to try and figure out its actual size. They moved on the side, trying not to get swiped against the cliffs. Sabo managed to direct the ship towards a small water cavern, big enough to hide their ship and find cover. The light from outside was soon not enough, and Ace brought an oil lamp to check out the place, while Sabo got an old still somehow functioning flashlight. The cavern was actually beautiful, natural light shining on the white stone and crystals from which some water dripped into white stalactites as tall as an adult man. Luffy, the only one who wasn't completely soaked, removed his hat to dry it up and gawked at the place with awe. The water was slightly calmer here, and the ceiling was high. If the water rose too much it wouldn't be too troublesome to leave the cavern. Sabo staggered on land to tie the ship to a particularly large spike, thus stabilizing the ship. Finally mumbled Sabo, mirroring Ace's thoughts and letting himself sit and lean against a rock, enjoying the break. Ace let himself lie on the deck, the waves slowly lulling him to rest. Now they were safe, he had no reason not to surrender to slumber, so he did. "What do you mean you don't know where Luffy is?" asked Ace, a panicked edge to his voice. "I was checking the damage on the Freedom, I thought he was with me the whole time," groaned Sabo, pinching the bridge of his nose. He really didn't see Luffy leave and was regretting it pretty badly. Even more after what happened last night. His younger brother wasn't always aware of the consequences of his actions, but when he was he could be very serious. Luffy hadn't eaten any meat all day, as per Ace's orders, but Sabo wondered how long he would resist this decision if he found some meat in the stockroom. They hadn't tied up the supplies good enough, and some of the food was all over the place, one of the barrels having broken during the storm. They would have to make sure it wouldn't happen again. "I'm going to go looking for him," said Ace angrily, and Sabo didn't protest. Once he was finished he would probably do the same. "I think the other side of the cavern leads to the island, there's some wind coming from this tunnel." Ace nodded, pipe in hand. Sabo winced internally, praying for Luffy's safety, not from any outside force, but from Ace's temper. Oh, he'll be fine, he was made of rubber after all, he'd survive. Ace, probably. The sight of a kid staring at his meat longingly without making any move to steal it was pretty interesting. He was so obviously drooling, but every time his hand rose, he slapped it down by his own will. "You're sure you don't want it?" asked Zoro, unimpressed. He caught this boar earlier in the day, before the storm broke out, and he wasn't sure he would be able to eat all of it. The dark-haired kid turned his attention to him, pinching his lips in quite a funny way and nodding. "Promised I won't eat meat cause I did something bad." Zoro blinked, "So he just refused to eat meat, The kid's stomach growls were still echoing in the cavern, and the green-haired kid sighed, getting some apples from the makeshift bag he made with a piece of fabric and throwing them at the kid. He found them in the forest. "Eat those then, you said you couldn't eat meat, right?" The other's eyes sparkled at the sight of the red apples, and he almost threw himself at them. Zoro would have laughed if it didn't bring him some awful pain to his injury. Instead he smiled, satisfied with himself. He wasn't all that sure how he survived his swim, all he knew was that 2 days ago he washed up on the beach of this island, still winded. Wado Ichimonji was safe, and he was just too glad that he didn't lose his treasure. He needed to leave this dangerous island as soon as possible, and this kid might just be his ticket. "Hey, you're a nice guy, wanna join my crew?" said the kid. "Never heard of this name, sorry." She thanked the older woman and let herself fall on a wooden bench. There was really too little that could be told about the Oikid kingdom nowadays. The kingdom wasn't even one anymore, having been toppled down by a group of rebels couple of years ago if she understood correctly. It was currently under the jurisdiction of a mayor of all things, a woman called Sandra, but the country was still recovering from war and really vulnerable to pirates. Basically nothing changed, the young woman thought dryly. The village she was visiting had been raided twice the past 4 months, and the townspeople were complaining that the militia was utterly useless against them. At least they were pretty willing to help her. They didn't have much, but they were really generous to offer everything they had. She'd been invited to eat with families more than once, leaving her food and money supplies fuller than she expected. They couldn't really resist of the act of the poor girl looking for her family in the ruins. Is it still an act though? She wondered, her desperation was painfully real, she wanted her family, she wanted her village, she wanted to save her. Swallowing her tears, she opened her backpack to check the map her sister copied from a book for her, holding it carefully and lovingly. The last item she got from her younger sister before she was taken from her. Her sister vanished for more than a month before she went looking for help. "Nami, I will find a way to help you," she whispered to the paper, reminding herself why she was doing this, and folded the map back in her bag. Ejiko stood and walked towards the next village. She believed she could do this, she had to. Sabo was studying the maps, trying to figure out which island they got lost in when he saw the innocent pill bottle laying there at the periphery of his vision. He blinked once, twice, then cursed under his breath. Ace hadn't taken his medication with him. Actually, he was pretty sure his brother didn't take his pills since at least the night before. It'd always been Sabo who prompted him to take them. Ace wasn't used to them yet. They were pretty efficient against his cataplexy, reducing it none, while his narcolepsy lowered to only once in the last couple of days. But without his medication, Sabo cursed again, frowning on the map and making his decision. He didn't know which island they landed on. They drifted off southwest, but despite his precise calculations, there was no island there. The map didn't show anything for some unfathomable reason. Either his calculations were really disrupted by the storm, in which case they might be in Costco, an island with a marine presence. Wasn't that unlucky? Ace might be in danger without knowing it, and Sabo took the bottle of pills before leaving the ship. The tidying would have to wait until Ace and Luffy were safe and sound, and Sabo got the occasion to punch them both to the face. He had no idea how those two could survive without him, really. "No," answered Zoro without missing a beat. He wasn't 100% sure what the kid wanted, but he knew he wanted no part in it. "Why?" whined the kid, his mouth still misshapen, full of apples. "Listen, I don't even know your name." He was cut mid-sentence. "Hi, I'm Luffy, join my crew." Zoro groaned. "I'm Zoro and no thanks." He was hoping Luffy's full mouth would keep him from talking, but he was very quickly disappointed, dodging the apple pieces the younger kid was sputtering. "Come on, I need a first mate Otherwick Ash, gonna find one first." He mumbled and Zoro sighed. He wasn't even sure what the other was talking about. Was he some kind of adventurer? He asked. "Oh no, I'm a pirate. I'm going to be the Pirate King." Then Luffy promptly choked on a piece of apple, and Zoro panicked slightly, not expecting that, and helped him with a maneuver he was taught back at the dojo. "Shishi, thanks." Luffy swallowed, and Zoro wondered how he managed to swallow one full apple so easily, but didn't ask this time. "I'm a bounty hunter, I can't be a pirate," added Zoro, leaning his head on his hand, munching on another piece of meat. "Don't care, you can still be a pirate." He could see Luffy drooling when he looked at his food, but he didn't try to go for the meat this time, even if he would have allowed him. "No, I don't." "Do you even have a pirate ship?" Zoro wasn't all that surprised. That kid nodded. He must have arrived on this island from somewhere. He was pretty certain there was no other child in the entire island, except for Zoro. "Yeah, and my brothers and I are all captains." He smiled widely and Zoro blinked, slightly amused. He wondered where his brothers were. They were in for a bad time if they went to the village. "And you want me to join you guys without asking them?" Luffy shook his head, morphing his young face into a more serious expression. "No, don't need, cause you're joining my crew, not Sabo's or Ace's." Oh, his name was Ace, not Ash, thought Zoro, then made a face at Luffy's affirmation. "I'm not joining your crew, kid." "Don't call me kid, I'm like the same age as you." Zoro raised an eyebrow, starting to get amused in spite of his reluctance. He signed him to continue. "I'm 9. 11, smirked Zoro, watching Luffy's face redden with embarrassment until he saw Luffy starting to laugh. It was contagious, and he barely realized he was chuckling until he did. How did the kid even? "What's your dream?" "You're a cool guy, it must be amazing," said Luffy suddenly, and with such seriousness Zoro was once again caught by surprise. He went from a light-hearted subject to one serious one in a second. "I will be the greatest swordsman," he said slowly, meaning every word. "Shishishi, that's perfect, the king of the pirates will need the strongest companions." "I didn't say I would join your crew," said Zoro, but it was getting more and more difficult to say those words. Who the hell was this kid? At the end of second tunnel, he saw the light of a campfire next to the entrance leading outside. The rain had stopped and his young brother was sitting with a stranger who was cooking his meat. Ace must have taken the other entrance then, Sabo sighed. Surprisingly enough, Luffy wasn't eating any of the meat. The other kid didn't look much older than himself, and to his dismay, he still looked taller than him. Well, that was unfair. He had the weirdest green hair he'd ever seen, way lighter than Makino's. He was wearing some white shirt and a kind of dark-colored scarf around his stomach. But the main thing he noticed were the 3 swords strapped to his hip, good quality weapons as far as he could tell. "Sabo?" yelled Luffy happily, seeing his brother coming from the cavern as well. Sabo smiled at him, then met the eyes of the stranger. His gaze was serious, but he didn't look like he hurt Luffy in any way. Hey, it's Zoro and he's going to be my first mate," said Luffy with absolute certainty. "No, I won't," grumbled the other with a higher voice than expected. He was young. And his complaint was only half-hearted. Had Luffy won him over already? He shouldn't be surprised seeing how fast the shy Kobe warmed up to him. Sabo just laughed and shrugged. "I see, please take care of my young brother." He winked at Zoro, who just sighed this time, not even trying to defend his claim anymore. "Have you seen Ace? He went looking for you." He then said to Luffy, who frowned and shook his head. Sabo sighed, slightly worried, but not as much as when Zoro intervened. "He shouldn't wander alone, people here are either bandits or lunatics, just saying." Sabo's worry absolutely spiked. "What do you mean? You don't know. It's Ramba, the Forbidden Island." He blinked, it wasn't on the map for sure. He couldn't wait for Ace to get into some kind of trouble, he had to find him now. "Hey, does that mean that we're going to fight?" said Luffy, way more excited than he should be. Sabo sighed, not even bothering to contradict him, while Zoro gave the younger boy a weird glance, then continued his explanation. "Well, I met the people around, something happened years ago, and the villagers think their god is mad at them or something, and want to find children and offer them to it." Sabo thought something really bad must have happened if it was to the point of erasing the island from the maps. "That's why you're hurt?" asked Luffy innocently, and Sabo looked at the green-haired who brought his hand to the dark band around his belly. "How do you even know that?" Zoro mumbled to him. Luffy frowned and explained to him that Zoro looked in pain the whole time, so he just knew. "No, it wasn't them, that was from pirates when I arrived, that's why I wasn't able to leave. The only boats that come here are from a group of bandits. They call themselves the Wolves, but I wasn't able to anyway. This island is where they stack their treasure, it's well guarded." The young man looked defeated in Sabo's eyes, but he decided to let him deal with his own demons. "Okay then, you should both stay here." At Sabo's words, Luffy immediately protested. "You're not going alone. If we lost Ace, you're gonna get lost too." Sabo ruffled Luffy's hair reassuringly. "I'll have Ace with me, and do I have to remind you, your friend here is hurt?" Zoro suddenly stood up. "I'm perfectly fine, we're coming with you. I've been there for 2 days already. And I have a score to settle with the bandits." He frowned and Sabo sighed. Luffy was smiling widely at Sabo, he won. "Okay, I guess. Guide us to the village." Ace was progressively getting more and more pissed. "Luffy!" he screamed again to the apparently empty forest. He wasn't quite sure how he ended up in one when he left the cavern, but he was still relatively sure how to get back, whenever he found Luffy, of course. The young man was still exhausted, and the small nap he took earlier only made him more tired and eager to go back to the ship to sleep, but he just couldn't bear idea of leaving Luffy behind. "Luffy, where are you?" he yelled again, unknowingly getting the wrong kind of attention. His path led to a weirdly empty village. It looked quite disheveled, but most doors still seemed in use, and everything was locked. The silence was creeping him out if Luffy was around. Suddenly, he could feel the usual drowsiness he felt before a narcolepsy attack. He stumbled and resisted it. He wasn't safe, he was in the middle of a. He fell to the ground, snoring, and his pursuers looked at each other with surprise. That was way easier than expected. The next couple of days were pretty peaceful in Kobe's opinion. He was living his best life, so proud and overjoyed to be able to be so close to his idols. They were nice and actually respected the justice they were supposed to represent. He was really relieved and so eager to become a Marine. He was questioned along with Ririka about the ASL's disappearance, but he easily lied about not knowing. The rumor that they were actual pirates spread for a while. Someone must have seen their departure and flag, but nothing was confirmed and they weren't suspected. Meaning he would be able to join the Marines without suspicions, at least until they were recognized as pirates, but even then linking him to them would be hopefully less likely. They were nice people, Kobe believed in it, they wouldn't get a bounty anytime soon, he hoped so, he really did. Once the pink-haired gathered the courage to ask a Marine to teach him how to fight, which admittedly took 2 whole days until Ririka literally pulled him in front of one, he found himself extremely busy. He might have underestimated how grateful the Marines and the city was in general, and the kind Marines accepted his requests. His first lessons were about when to fight. As a civilian kid, he wasn't supposed to pick fights with anyone unless he was absolutely certain there was no authority who could help around. Despite their apparent uselessness, Kobe took them very seriously and engraved them to memory. He was then showed how to strengthen himself, the exercises he should do, the same as Marine apprentices were taught. Kobe spent entire days working on them, going as far as he could before he fell exhausted. Once or twice he saw Helmeppo watching him but didn't know what to tell him. The other boy wasn't charged for anything of his father's crimes and was even pitied by some inhabitants, having seen what happened at the plaza. Then one morning, Helmeppo followed him silently and copied his exercises, and Kobe couldn't help his smile. He knew the kid wasn't completely rotten, he sincerely wanted to be a marine too, and it made the pink-haired really glad to have someone who shared that with him. One morning, an actual vice admiral arrived to the island with the loudness and the strength of 1,000 elephants. There was no way Kobe was able to miss the huge bulky old man. Vice Admiral Garp was a renowned hero, he was famous for capturing hundreds of pirates including the king of the pirates himself and bringing him to the Marines to get arrested. And yet, he was absolutely nothing like Kobe would have imagined. 20 seconds after being brought to Morgan's old office to be questioned, the door closing behind them, Garp the hero fell asleep on the office table. Kobe stared, he stared for a whole minute, questioning his short life, why was he even there? He didn't have to wait that long in the end. Pop. What was I saying? The man mumbled, wiping the spit from his chin. Oh right. Where did my grandsons go? He looked straight at Kobe with a much more serious expression, his earlier absent-mindedness vanishing completely. The young boy blanched, but the question barely registered in his mind. Who was he even talking about? Who sorry sir, I am mean sea captain whu. My grandsons. The vice admiral said louder, making Kobe's limbs shake uncontrollably. Luffy, Ace, Sabo. Where are they? Then it clicked in Kobe's mind. Vice Admiral Garp promised a nice sum and a reputation for the one who would capture his grandsons. Oh, it was him. He could barely remember what happened back then during the fights, and he couldn't remember much with the sheer terror that Morgan's presence brought him until now. That explained why Ace, Sabo and Luffy were such in a hurry to leave the island, their grandpa was after them. Their grandpa, the Vice Admiral Garp, grandpa. Kobe's head span and he stared at the man again, now understanding the question, but being unable to open his mouth and answer. They were his friends, if he told the man he would go after them. He was one of the strongest marines, he would definitely catch Luffy, Sabo, could he really betray them? I cannot say, sir, he said lowly, almost whimpering, closing his eyes to keep himself from regretting it. The silence filled the room. You can't say? Asked a colder voice and Kobe gulped and shook his head. Another silence filled the room, the vice admiral's intent so thick Kobe could feel it and he didn't dare breathing anymore. Then it stopped and the vice admiral's next word surprised him. I heard you want to be a marine. Kobe nodded with his head. If you tell me where they are I'll pull some strings and make sure you get into a nice position in a couple of years. What do you think? Kobe bit his lip, it was what he always dreamed of. He wiped some snot from his nose. I will be the king of the pirates. That's for insulting Kobe's dream. What about this, me and my brothers take you to the next island. Kobe's eyes filled with tears and lowered his head. Luffy, Ace, Sabo. I apologize, I can't. They're my friends he thought but didn't say, they were his first friends and he couldn't bear the idea of betraying them so easily. Suddenly Kobe heard voices outside the room, a kid's voice, it was Helmeppo, he was calling for him. I guess I don't have a choice then. You win kid. Bwahahaha. Kobe turned his attention back to the laughing man, Garp was way closer to him than he expected. Ahaha, alright, you're coming with me. Huh? He caught Kobe by the back of the shirt like a lost kitten and walked out of the room. Helmeppo was there and he paled seeing the situation his friend was in. As Garp walked out and the guard's attention was away from him, the blonde followed them. Monkey D. Garp wasn't as unhappy as he should be. Well, he had found a lead in the kid called Kobe, this one refused to tell him anything. The older vice admiral was frustrated by his refusal at first and tempted to beat the answer out of him, the man wasn't the most subtle. But he heard the kid's dream was to become Marine, in fact he saw him training the same morning he arrived and being his grandson's friend as the witnesses had stated, Garp got intrigued. So he decided he would test him. As much as he wanted to catch the brats, they were family and he wanted the best for them. It wouldn't do for him to beat the crap out of their first, to his knowledge, friend. Then if Kobe turned out rotten and ratted them out, he wouldn't be considered his kid's friend anymore, right? And he would be guiltlessly able to beat him up for being a little traitor and send him to Sakazuki to become his cabin boy. He knew the old dog hated opportunists, it would be perfect. Yeah, decided the old man, he wouldn't allow his brats to have a poor-minded fool as a friend. Except for the fact that the kid was an actual honest brat who was ready to put his dream aside for his friends. And Garp could read him easily, Kobe was clearly tempted by his offer for an easy start, he felt the potential in his unchangeable will. So Garp did the first thing that came to his mind and just decided to take the kid with him, to hell with consequences. Oh yes, Bogard would be giving crap about his impulses again, but the pink kid could even become an interesting subordinate later on if he could deal with his idea of training. Garp's face split into a very satisfied smile as he carried the brat to his ship. He had no more time to lose, he would find his little rascals as soon as possible. We've passed this tree 4 times. said Sabo in a deadpan tone. At first he believed the other kid would be able to guide him to the village, but now, not only they didn't find the village, they were also completely lost. "It was here, the path moved," answered Zoro with the same bored voice, and Sabo just got enough of that and punched the green-haired at the top of his head. "No, it didn't." Luffy was, of course, laughing his ass off, rolling on the ground. "Erg, what the foo. We need to find Ace, and this guy is obviously not helping." Sabo pulled Luffy by his collar to lead him away, but his younger brother resisted. "Zoro is my first mate. He's coming with us, he needs to get off this island too." The blonde stared at his brother's pleading dark eyes and sighed. "He can come, but he's not getting us lost again. You stay behind," he said towards the young swordsman. This one frowned and his hands itched towards his swords, but he was hesitating for long enough for someone else to interfere. "What are kids doing here?" "Hey, it's the one that attacked Rug." They looked at Zoro and immediately got their own swords out ready to fight. Zoro frowned, those were apparently bandits, and Sabo assumed the green-haired annoyance knew them. After a few seconds of hesitation, Sabo got ready to take both of them. "Onigiri," said a young voice and one of the bandits was suddenly bleeding on the floor. Alright, maybe Luffy's chosen future first mate wasn't completely useless. Sabo jumped on the second guy whose attention was taken by the young swordsman and whacked him on the head with his metal pipe before he could react. He frowned at the sight of blood on the green-haired boy's side, his makeshift scarf bandage not holding anymore, and his blood was dripping to the floor. Damn, it opened again. Zoro removed his scarf, he did mention he had been wounded before by pirates. Alright, Sabo decided, good fighter or not, Zoro was also an idiot. Gum no pistol. Sabo turned around and saw another bandit they didn't notice getting punched to the face by Luffy, who smiled playfully when the man flew and hit a tree and fell to the ground, unconscious. Yeah, Luffy's strength was definitely going to become something at some point, the blonde better not let him surpass him. "Yeah, I got him. Hey Sabo, let's find the bandits' home and they can tell us where the village is." His blonde brother blinked and eventually agreed they were not going anywhere like this. If they didn't even know where they were they wouldn't find the village. They were coming from this direction. "Let's go," said Sabo and the three boys went to find the bandit base. He wasn't staying, he was done hearing them yell at each other day after day. He wished one of them would leave so he could have some peace. His mother slapped him for suggesting that and he just felt so tired and angry. The young man slid his notebook to his pocket and checked the backpack he prepared haphazardly. His parents hadn't even noticed the missing money or food. He would be better on his own. He didn't want to do anything with them anymore. He decided he would leave the island and find an academy for his studies. As the light blue-haired boy climbed out of the window, his dream of becoming a doctor didn't feel so far away anymore. Ace woke up in an unpleasant haze, he was tied up and carried on someone's shoulder like a sack of potatoes. His head was aching, and the young man realized he must have had a narcolepsy attack. Of course, just his luck, he would be immediately scooped up by some random strangers. He hoped Luffy wasn't in a similar situation, thus without waiting another second, he struggled to escape. As he kicked the one carrying him to the face, he fell on the grass, he was back in the forest and surrounded by three weird guys. They were wearing some mining uniforms and covered in soot. The weird part was their faces, all of them had empty bloodshot eyes and creepy smiles. "Who are you? What do you want?" asked Ace, finding his balance to stand on his feet. Depending on the answer he was ready to bolt out of here, actually he wouldn't even need to as his ties were already weakened by his fall. "You're important for the god of depths, he's the protector of this island and he wants a child. Please don't resist, we won't hurt you." Like hell he was believing that from the guys who tied him up. Finally getting his hands free, he took a fighting stance. Those people were weak and emaciated, he was pretty sure he could kick their asses. One of them approached him to grab at him, he swung his arm and punched him in the face. Ace was aware that his strength was superior to even most adults, and they didn't expect a child to be that strong. The young man took pleasure in proving them wrong. Without missing a beat he launched himself at a second villager who got kicked in the face. He almost broke into a satisfied smile, but before he even touched the floor, a leg out of nowhere kicked the young man at the stomach. The blow much stronger than any he ever remember receiving, maybe save for Garp's fists of love. Ace fell on the floor and rolled out of the way of the next blow. He didn't hear this man coming, but immediately he knew that this one was on another level. He was tall and quite muscular, steadier and heavier than any of the villagers he got caught by. His hair was cut really short and his expression extremely bored even as he was dealing with Ace so effortlessly. "So you're the kid causing a ruckus on my island, I heard you had swords, where are they now?" The man asked and Ace had absolutely no idea what this guy was talking about. The freckled boy still got no time to answer as he had to dodge a punch to the face. As he tried to riposte with a kick to the man's chest, he failed to notice the hand grabbing his other leg until it was too late, stopping him with ease as he dangled from the tall man's hold. Ace got struck to the face, making him see stars until a voice he didn't recognize intervened. "Hey boss Hamrock, wait, it's not the sword kid, I think it's one of the mystery grandsons of Garp. He looks like the picture. He's worth 5 million. Ace froze, then immediately he started to trash like the devil himself was after him, which from his point of view, was the case. Oh hell no, he wasn't letting this guy get him to his grandfather. Really? Hamrock didn't even seem fazed by Ace's attempts to kick his face, and the freckled boy was pretty frustrated. The man caught him by his hair and smiled for the first time, showing his dark ugly teeth, not a very pleasant expression. "Then, where are your brothers? You're not here alone, are you?" Ace frowned, trying to get out of the man's hold, but was unsuccessful. He would not give his brothers out, no way. He would rather die first. Zoro watched the man with apprehension, the pain of his bleeding wound pushed to the background. When he arrived on this island, he was unlucky. Hungry, dehydrated, hurt and exhausted, he fought 5 bandits and he was defeated. For the first time since Kuina, he lost a fight and he couldn't forgive himself for running away. Right here and now though he felt much better and he got a chance for redemption. There was a dozen of bandits in their base and he was kicking their ass. Sure, the rubber kid was helping, taking off his share of bandits and covering his back. Luffy wasn't a bad fighter, stronger physically than almost anyone he met before. His stretching limbs able to take down 5 bandits at once. He wondered how strong his blonde brother was, but he had no idea where the other was. Zoro wished to try his strength against Sabo at some point, but the teen had barely looked at him, absolutely dead focused on his objective to find Ace. This blonde wasn't even using a sword, but this metal pipe did look absolutely deadly in his hands. Zoro slashed at another opponent, slowly getting his pride back as he defeated more men. He would not lose again. Sabo ignored the sounds of fighting outside the tent and focused his attention on the documents at hand. The emergency of the possibility of Ace being in danger faded in the background. Sabo needed to know what was going on to be able to solve their problem. If he could find a map it would be perfect. When they entered the bandit base, there was surprisingly so little resistance it was laughable. A lot of guards but really weak bandits, and as Zoro and Luffy enjoyed themselves, Sabo wondered where were the strong ones in such an important place. It was suspicious. The documents were supposed to clear it out for him, but they only brought more questions. The bandits on this island were not simply some low-grade criminals making raids on islands and bringing their treasure here. They were part of an organization, one that had plans and money. It was only mentioned as the ties, and Sabo had no idea what to do with all this information, but still memorized it. From a letter asking for more meat to feed the god, he deduced that they tamed some kind of sea king, so the crazy villagers would get something for them. There was also something about mushrooms, but he wasn't all that sure what that was for. But from what he could gather with the amount of money received by the ties, it was pretty big. More than 10 million berries just for Ramba, the Forbidden Island. Not only that, but he could find traces that this island's isolation might have been orchestrated by the same organization. Official governmental documents may be faked, and from the accounts, some dozen millions berries were sent monthly to a marine captain called Tuggings. It extended on so many years he must be rich right now. It was absolutely crazy and the blonde teen felt sick. He still couldn't stop, he needed to know why. Was it all for money? If they invested so much, Sabo assumed this island must be really lucrative, so how? More questions than answers. Unfortunately for him, the documents were coded too. Whatever resource the villagers were getting was called sugar, but he was quite certain it couldn't be the food. It didn't look like an island with plantations. He was interrupted from the task at hand. Yeah right, they still needed to find Ace. Sabo shoved some of the documents inside his satchel to read later. "Hey Sabo." Luffy called him a second time, entering the tent with a heavy bag on his back. "We found a treasure." Looking at what was inside the bag, Sabo's mouth fell open. Shiny white stones, not all were carved, but from his life as a outlook noble Sabo couldn't not recognize them. Those were actual diamonds, mystery solved. She stared at the broken wood sadly. Najiko knew she should have left a week ago. There was nothing for her here. She missed everyone. She missed Kokoyashi, the Grove, Genzo, and most of all, her sister. But she couldn't go home empty-handed, coming home and ending up in the Mikan Grove, alone, hoping her sister wasn't dead yet. The blue-haired girl wiped her eyes and sat down next to the remains of her small ship. Yesterday a group of bandits attacked the docks. Her ship was one of the unfortunate victims. There was nothing much in it, fortunately. She always kept her precious items with herself, but how was she supposed to go home now? "Are you alright?" asked a smooth female voice, and Najiko jumped in surprise. It was a woman with yellow sunglasses. She was purple-haired and looked like she was in her 40s. Najiko couldn't pretend she was very trusting in general, but she really had nothing to lose. "My ship is gone, I can't go home." She just mumbled. "You're pretty young to be traveling alone," the woman answered, sitting next to her. The young teen noticed how nice she looked, her hair tied in intricate bun, her perfume smelt expensive, her jewelry glistened in the evening sun, and even her dark top hat was decorated with pearls. She looked rich, and Nijiko wondered how she attracted this woman's attention. "It's a nice view, isn't it?" She probably referred to the white walls in the horizon, the ones that used to protect the kingdom until it expanded, the Oikakai country. It was a country now, and she nodded. She couldn't remember much of her childhood before she found Nami and met Bellemere, but the white walls felt somehow very familiar. "I heard this country used to be your home and you came here looking for family, am I wrong?" The woman asked, in the same casual tone, and Nijiko got a bat in her gut. How did she know? She did talk to some people, but she never met this woman before. The purple-haired woman seemed to have noticed her apprehension, and she tilted her hat so it partially hid her face while she whispered. "I truly am sorry." Nijiko quickly stood and looked around her, noticing for the first time the 5 of guards surrounding them, pointing their spears at her. She had nowhere to go. "Who are you?" Nijiko asked in a choked-up voice, feeling her panic rising. "Mayor Sandra, nice to meet you." The woman stood, smiling gently at her, but Nijiko didn't feel safe. She swallowed hard. "Would you mind following us for a bit? We do not wish to hurt you." Her smooth voice said, but it sounded like an order Nijiko couldn't say no to. So she just managed to answer in a small voice. "Sure." The first thing the young man did when he left home was to hide his face with a dark mask he made himself. The captain merchant that hired him laughed at his face when he asked to be taken in, not only at his mask, but also saying he didn't look like he was 17. In the end accepted him anyway. He was grateful. The merchant captain was an overweight red-haired man who smelled like alcohol, but at least he was joyful and who joked with his cruel lot, so he didn't regret his decision. The ship departed a day ago and he was cleaning the main deck with 2 older boys. They were pretty rude if he was honest, and he pretty much hated them, but he knew better than fighting them. The teen didn't doubt that he would be thrown overboard if he started trouble, and no matter how well he could swim, he didn't feel like taking a bath in the frigid waters. The reason he chose this ship in particular wasn't all that complicated. He heard that the Orchid Island had the best medical academy of East Blue. He would work hard and become a great doctor, it was a promise he made to himself. Things weren't looking up in Ace's life right now. "Screw you." Ace spat some build-up blood to Hamrock's face, still struggling to escape to no avail. The dark-haired man looked unhappy for a second and then without warning he simply twisted his ankle with a turn of the wrist to punish the gesture. Ace yelped from pain and surprise, but then bit his lip to remain silent. It hurt but it wasn't overwhelming. He got punched twice more, but he didn't say another word. He really wished he had his pipe, he was pretty sure that he would have been able to kick his ass with a weapon. Boss," yelled a panicked man. Ace didn't bother looking at him, mostly because the world spanned too fast. "Someone attacked the base. It's on fire. We found Jerry and Flo unconscious and they told us a bunch of kids." Ace's blood ran cold and he raised his head. Hamrock was ignoring him now and stood up, taller than all his men. Ace knew he was really strong, but cursed his own incompetence. If he was able to beat this guy, Sabo and Luffy wouldn't be at risk now. If only he was strong enough. "Must be his brothers, but we're on a tight schedule. The first ship is ready, Gaug, get him to the meeting point. If I'm not here in an hour you can just go, I'll take the second ship with the rest of the cargo." "Yes, boss." Ace was pulled by his shirt and hollered on someone's back. His wrists were tied from the beginning of the interrogation, and unlike the villagers those guys knew what they were doing, he wouldn't be able to escape that easily. He cursed himself and hoped Luffy and Sabo would be alright. He watched as the joyful captain and a couple of men boarded the lifeboat to save their hides from the sinking ship. The storm was really unlucky, and as the ship got split in half after some powerful wave, there was nothing much to do to save their trip. One of his annoying young comrades tried to ask them to board as well, but after he was refused twice, he was rewarded with a hit to his temple. The young man fell unmoving to the floor and the blue-haired boy didn't try his turn. He wanted to check on the young man, he was slightly older than him and he made fun of his mask earlier the same day, but he couldn't let him just die. He tried to reach him but the side of the ship he was in twisted and he lost his balance. The teen could only watch helplessly as a wave took the teen overboard. He couldn't do anything but stare with horror. The half of the ship he was in was sinking alarmingly fast, but he found an empty barrel to float with and just let himself go. Hours later, the young man was laying on a beach, he found land, alive but alone. Out of spite he hoped the captain and his men died, but he didn't really believe in those thoughts. They wanted to survive as bad as him, he couldn't really fault them for trying their best. The worst part from his point of view was probably that he lost all his parents' money, he wouldn't be able to pay for his studies, he wanted to cry, but instead investigated this deserted sandy island. He would need to save all the water he had if he didn't want to die from dehydration. He could find the money later, for now he just needed to survive. "We're done here," Sabo said with a contemplative voice, and Luffy thought he was a bit angry. He could guess that from the nice bump he was now sporting on his scalp. From what his brother explained to him, the villagers were stuck here working for these bandits, and the rubber boy thought it was unfair, and now everything was on fire, thus the bump. He wasn't even sure how that happened, he was never allowed to play with fire before. Ace said that the smell of burned rubber was the worst. But now Luffy didn't regret it much, not only he found some great treasure, but he also destroyed the bandits' lair. "The fire will get their attention, we should go to the village now," mumbled his brother, he was carrying the treasure on his back. "Yeah, let's find Ace," yelled Luffy happily and turned to Zoro. His first mate was holding a very pale bandit by the rope he was tied to. The green teen was still hurt but looked better than before, happier. And when Luffy had tasked him with catching a bandit to find the village, the young swordsman had taken his job very seriously. Luffy wanted to hug him, though it was probably the wrong moment, he would do that later. They walked in the forest, the bandit in the front, leading them. The island must have been smaller than Luffy thought, because after a couple of minutes only, they were already at the village. With a swift move of Zoro's swords, the rope was cut and the bandit ran away, as promised. Sabo looked like he wanted to say something, and Luffy decided it wasn't important. "Ah, see," he screamed to the empty village. They ran for a couple of minutes, and suddenly lots of people attacked them. They didn't look like bandits, and they fell way easier under his fists. Like for Kobe, Luffy held back, he didn't want to hurt them too bad. "Have you seen another kid? Around my age, dark hair, freckles?" Sabo pulled one of their aggressors, or more like victims, by the collar. "The god of the depths will avenge," said a croaking voice, and Sabo shook him, he shook him hard. "Where is my brother?" Sabo had an odd edge to his voice, he sounded mad. Luffy had never seen him so angry, and while he trusted Ace would be fine, seeing his brother so tense brought worry to the younger captain. "Hey captain," said Zoro, while Sabo kept asking about Ace, "you should see this." He pointed something on the floor, a couple of meters from them. It was a shoe, one of Ace's sandals, and next to it a spot of red. Luffy didn't know how to feel, Ace would be fine, he was strong. Stronger than any of them, he was. Luffy took the sandal, holding it tight. They took him to the docks. They were supposed to leave yesterday, but the storm. "Where are the docks?" Sabo's voice was cold, Luffy felt cold too. "Go over there," pointed the man, and Sabo let him go, his gaze crossed Luffy's, and he froze. "Luffy," he said with a confident voice and a slight smile. "Let's go get Ace back." A smile crept on Luffy's face as well. "Yeah." They ran to the docks as fast as they could, but there was only one ship to be seen with no Ace in sight. But worse, there was a lot of bandits loading this ship, and they saw them immediately. Luffy got ready to fight, his arm already swinging for momentum. The bandits were numerous but not much better than the fry from the base. Gum no whip. The guy that Sabo was fighting though, looked way stronger, but he trusted his brother and kept any bandits from getting any close to them. Luffy didn't really see his brother getting punched hard, but he heard him fall behind him. He walked to stand next to his brother, he was bleeding from his nose and glaring at the man. "Where is my brother?" asked the blonde, and Luffy noticed that Zoro got the memo as well and stood on Luffy's right. It reassured Luffy to know that his first mate was at his side. Zoro was really cool and awesome. "Haha, he's already gone to the sea, but no worries, you guys are joining him soon. But first, which ones of you are Garp's grandsons?" Luffy froze in instinctive fear. Yeah, he didn't want to face his grandpa, really not, but before he had the time to process what was going on, Sabo pulled at his arm and Zoro's and started running to the forest, pointing a direction. "Ace is a priority. Luffy. As soon as you can make a slingshot. To the ship." Luffy's mouth opened in surprise, while Zoro looked at both of them without understanding. Luffy frowned unhappily, he wanted to fight, to prove he was strong enough to save Ace. But at the blonde's expression he decided to listen and question him later. Sabo always made better plans anyway. Despite the adults pursuing them, they were still really fast on their feet, and while they didn't lose the men, they had enough margin to attempt the move. They hadn't exactly practiced it before. The three brothers talked about it after what happened on the Humming Isles. After seeing Luffy use it to get away, they thought about doing it together. A solution for a quick and efficient escape from any too much to handle authorities that tried to pursue them. Luffy smiled excitedly, and once he found a nice spot, he caught two well-placed branches and pulled back, suddenly stretching his arms at the opposite side to where they needed to go. Meanwhile, bandits were slowly catching up, he better be fast. "Get ready. It's going to be quick." If Luffy was more perceptive, or perceptive at all, he would hear the slight hint of apprehension in his voice. Sabo wrapped his arm around the treasure to steady it and with his free hand pulled on Zoro's arm to set him in front of Luffy. With a sigh, Sabo stood next to the confused crewmate. Zoro turned to the arriving bandits. He wasn't really attentive to what his new captain was doing, otherwise he would have been way more afraid for his life. No. It happened without any more warning, and as he let go, Luffy pulled his legs around his crewmates to make sure they wouldn't get away, and they literally flew. Slingshot. Behind them the bandits just stared in surprise. What the F? What are you waiting for? Go catch them. Yelled Hamrock, and his underlings came to obey. Nijiko's feeling of unease never stopped growing since they left the docks, but there was nothing to be done. The guards followed her closely, and Sandra was walking right next to her, giving the illusion to be on her side. Nijiko sighed. She wondered why she was in trouble. Did one of the families that housed her complain about her or something? Did she do something wrong? Do you know about the war, the one that ended 12 years ago? Nijiko jumped slightly and nodded. She didn't really feel like talking, thankfully the older woman had that covered. The King Clemens was a great ruler, he finished what his father started and conquered this whole island. Took him many years, but he became the emperor of the Oiked Kingdom. And honestly, it would have been fine if after a couple of years of reign, he didn't start taking the people who interested him as slaves. The army was already full of them, full of slave soldiers that lost the war, and as he was so successful, people started to believe that he was some kind of god. Nijiko looked up at the woman who was giving her a particularly cold stare. Her voice was still calm, and Nijiko guessed that as the new ruler she probably had no love for the old regime. No one told her this part of the story, mostly the grand lines and not so bluntly. There are a lot of legends surrounding this place, but one in particular might interest you. She still had no idea what it had to do with her words. Have you ever wondered why families accepted to help you so gracefully? Did you believe it was from the goodness of their hearts? Nijiko gulped, suddenly feeling threatened by her cooling voice. Legends say that blue hair is a sign of good luck and grants wishes. But it's not any blue color, it's a very particular shade, the pale shade of sky reflected on the sea. Nijiko's eyes widened. She had been surprised by the generosity of the people, but she didn't know anything of the sort. It did explain the reverence and the politeness of the families. Sandra continued. They say blue is the color of the gods, the colors of the rulers. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? They were in front of the palace. The white building was imposing, but less than she expected. Her head was spinning, it was smaller and a tower was missing. She felt sick, she didn't like the idea of going there. Sandra put her hand on Nijiko's shoulder and led her forwards gently, talking in a lower, kinder voice. I really wished you wouldn't stay that long, that you'd leave before it was too late. You've been recognized, and we can't keep you free. I apologize, princess. Nijiko couldn't move, she couldn't think. She recalled the royal family had been killed, that's why she wasn't able to find any family, because they were all gone. Sabo knew when to give up, he knew this fight wasn't worth it, Ace was more important. He always believed in Ace's strength, and if Ace lost. He was really good at pretending that it was alright for Luffy's sake, but he also knew he couldn't lie too long. Luffy would read him given time, and he wouldn't like what he would see. Ace was hurt, more than hurt maybe, probably, the man Sabo fought was really strong, and he didn't miss the shine of cruelty in his eyes. If the tall adult wanted something, he would get it, and he got Ace. Open the sails, the caverns won't hold them that long, we need to go. Luffy sprung to unfurl the sails, and Sabo directed the swordsman to retrieve the anchor, as he himself took care of the half-done mooring he did earlier the same day. How fast did everything go to hell? Sabo was angry but in control, the bandits wouldn't catch up to them, and they would be able to go look for Ace. That is the end, so, thanks for watching. Comment down below with recommendations on what fanfic I should do next. And remember to like and subscribe to my channel.